Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey that spans nearly 2,000 years, a royal roller coaster of swords, scandals, wigs, and occasionally very questionable fashion choices. You stand on the edge of Britain's misty coastlines, watching waves crash where Roman galleons once docked and legions marched in their famously uncomfortable sandals. There's no Big Ben yet, no cups of tea, just druids, stone circles, and the uneasy sound of civilization packing up. You probably won't survive. This one literally, because Roman Britain's end is chaos on toast. There's no final broadcast, no ceremony, just the steady crumbling of an empire as local warlords eye the silver left behind. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and wet moss. You trudge along muddy Roman roads, weeds pushing through the cracks, following the retreat of the world's most powerful empire. Around 410 CE, the last official Roman troops abandoned Britain. The Emperor Honorius, somewhere far away, and probably avoiding eye contact, sends a brisk little note telling the Britons to fend for themselves. Good luck, essentially. Don't call us. What you're left with is a collapsing infrastructure. Imagine London's underground system just giving up forever, and you're still expected to get to work. Roman towns begin to empty, villas rot, roofs collapse, Latin slowly fades, replaced by patchy regional dialects and the occasional grunt. But the Britons aren't gone. They're just disoriented. You hear stories whispered in smoky halls about a leader named Vortigern, though historians still argue whether he was real or just the original bad manager. He supposedly invites mercenaries from across the sea, the Saxons, Angles, and Jutes to help defend Britain from the Picts and Irish raiders. Great plan, right? Except the guests don't leave, they like it here. The weather's terrible, but the farmland's decent. And the locals are surprisingly easy to conquer. You can almost hear the awkward dinner conversation. Thanks for having us, Vortigern. My pleasure. So, when are you heading back? Oh, we're staying now. This sets off a slow-motion invasion. It's not a single dramatic D-Day landing, but rather decades of creeping settlements. Anglo-Saxon kingdoms start appearing like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Kent, Sussex, Wessex, Essex, each carved out by migrants who bring their own gods, customs, and annoyingly hard-to-pronounce names. Meanwhile, the Britons retreat westward, into Wales and Cornwall, holding tight to their Roman Christian identity and their increasingly mythical past. This is where Arthur begins to shimmer into view. No, not the Disney sword-pulling kid, though he owes a lot to these tales. The real Arthur, if he ever existed, was likely a war leader, maybe of Romano-British origin, who rallied troops against the Saxons. His legend is like a fog, beautiful, persistent, and impossible to hold. Quirky tidbit? There's a theory, more niche than your local medieval reenactor's beard wax, that Arthur wasn't British at all, but a Romanized cavalry commander from the Balkans. Because sure, why not throw ancient Albania into the British monarchy origin story? As Saxon culture spreads, you begin to see the first real push toward monarchy. Not just warlords, but kings claiming divine favor and issuing law codes. Ethelbert of Kent in the 6th century becomes one of the earliest known to do so. He even converts to Christianity thanks to a visit from Augustine of Canterbury, a missionary with decent charisma stats. Monarchy, it turns out, sells better when backed by heaven. And just like that, England begins to take shape. Not the modern state, but the idea of it. Small kingdoms jostle for dominance, trade flourishes again in pockets, and monastic scribes start scribbling their way into history. Still, this is no golden age. You wouldn't want to live here unless you're into daily subsistence farming, very iffy dentistry, and the occasional surprise raid from your neighbors. Kings rise and fall quickly. Power is tribal, regional, and often bloody, but a pattern is forming. Leadership means more than muscle. You start hearing about royal bloodlines, divine right, and succession. The pieces of the monarchy are clicking into place like puzzle pieces covered in mud and goat hair. By the late 600s, Northumbria becomes a cultural powerhouse. Monasteries like Lindisfarne churn out illuminated manuscripts, and the venerable Bede, a monk with a suspiciously excellent memory, starts writing down England's early history. His work helps glue together the myth and reality of what's unfolding, making sure later kings can trace their lineage back to the good old days, even if those days involved significantly fewer toilets. But the peace doesn't last. It never does. And while the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms squabble among themselves, another threat looms on the horizon. You squint toward the sea, just in time to see longboats darken the waves. You wake up to the sound of water lapping against wooden hulls and the muffled clang of weapons being readied below deck. It's early morning. The mist still clings low to the marshy shoreline, and the first hints of sunlight reveal slender, dragon-headed ships slicing through the water. The North has arrived, loud, bearded, and very much in the mood to take things that aren't theirs. The Viking Age crashes into Anglo-Saxon England like a boot through a thatched roof. You unfortunately are inside that metaphorical cottage. The first known raid hits Lindisfarne in 793. A quiet little monastery known for its serene manuscripts and peacefully aging monks is torn apart in a storm of blood and burning scripture. You probably heard this story in school, or at least caught a meme of a screaming monk holding up a fish. It wasn't funny for the monks. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle doesn't mince words. It calls it a harbinger of evil. You feel that truth ripple outward like shockwaves through a trembling kingdom. Over the next century, Viking attacks become more than just random smash and grabs. They evolve into sustained campaigns of conquest. You clutch your tunic a little tighter as armies, not just raiding parties, land on English shores. They move inland, claiming land, establishing winter camps that become permanent homes. By 865, the ominously named Great Heathen Army lands, several thousand Norse warriors led by legendary figures like Ivar the Boneless. Yes, historians still argue whether he was literally boneless, just had a weird gait, or was maybe just excellent PR. These Vikings aren't just here to loot. They're here to rule. Entire Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fall. Northumbria, toast. East Anglia, sliced like a festive Yule ham. Mercia, mostly gone, holding on by its muddy fingernails. You duck your head as Danelaw, the region of Viking control, stretches from York down toward London. Suddenly, your local lord answers to someone named Guthrum, and you're not sure if you should offer him a drink or hide your livestock. But not all is lost. Amid the smoke and ash rises a name you'll cling to like a life raft. Alfred. You probably remember him as that king who burned the cakes. And yes, that tale persists. Alfred, hiding from Vikings in the marshes of Somerset, stays with a peasant woman and absent-mindedly lets her cakes burn. A human moment, if true. A PR masterpiece, if not. Alfred of Wessex is the only English king to be called the Great, and after surviving multiple Viking onslaughts, you begin to understand why. He doesn't just fight, he strategizes. He builds fortified towns, burhs, and creates a defense system more organized than any England has seen before. Think medieval bunkers with livestock. He also negotiates. After defeating Guthrum at the Battle of Edington in 878, Alfred agrees to let the Vikings keep the Danelaw, while converting Guthrum to Christianity as part of the deal. It's a power move disguised as a baptism, but Alfred isn't just a warlord. He understands something most rulers miss. If you want to last, you need more than just swords. You need schools, books, and laws. He promotes literacy, translates Latin texts into Old English, and revamps the legal system. You sit through a few dry pages of legal code, but it's oddly comforting. At least someone's thinking about peace for once. Quirky tidbit. Alfred had a thing for timekeeping. He designed a candle clock system to measure hours by burning wax, with each candle marked in increments. Early medieval productivity hack. Anyone? Still, the dream of a single English kingdom remains just that, a dream. When Alfred dies in 899, you're left wondering whether the fragile balance will hold. His son Edward the Elder takes the reins and continues the push against the Danelaw, but uniting these fractured lands will take generations of effort and quite a few more crowns. During this time, kingship itself begins to solidify into a hereditary institution. It's no longer just about muscle or charisma. Bloodlines matter. Claims of divine favor are increasingly baked into the royal brand, and you begin to hear the rumblings of England as a concept, not just a scattering of kingdoms, but a place ruled under one crown. The idea is seductive, dangerous, almost modern, but under that polished veneer the chaos simmers. Not everyone accepts the notion of one king to rule them all. Rival factions linger, Borders blur. Norse lords in York still hold power, and southern kings must watch their backs. You sense the next few decades won't be quiet ones. By the mid-900s, Athelstan, Alfred's grandson, steps up. Now this guy gets things done. He defeats the last Viking stronghold in York, wins the bloody Battle of Brunanburh in 937, a showdown historians still argue over when trying to name the real founding moment of England, and styles himself King of all Britain. Modest? No. Effective? Absolutely. Under Athelstan, you see coinage standardized, laws codified with teeth, and foreign kings actually respecting English power. It's a brief golden stretch. You can almost relax. But remember what happens when you relax in this story? Exactly. Power doesn't stay still. Kings die. Sons squabble. And just as England seems ready to stabilize, new invaders eye it hungrily again. The Vikings haven't given up. In fact, they're just getting warmed up. And that, my friend, is your cue to tighten your cloak and keep walking. The next storm's already gathering on the horizon. You don't even get time to rinse the Viking blood out of your boots before another fleet rises on the eastern horizon. It's the late 10th century, and just when England starts to believe in its own unity, a new wave of Norse invaders decides to test that confidence. Only this time they're more organized, richer, and oddly polite, until they're not. You're back under the wide gray skies of England, watching panic ripple through coastal towns like dominoes tipped by a very large axe. King Ethelred sits the throne now, and if the name sounds vaguely apologetic, that's fitting. History remembers him as Ethelred the Unready, but not because he was late to meetings. The word actually means ill-advised, which frankly sounds worse. You can practically hear his court whispering, "Great guy, but should not be left alone with foreign policy." The Danes come roaring back, and this time they don't just want loot. They want leverage. Their longships bring not just warriors, but a demand, pay up or perish. England starts shelling out huge sums of silver in what becomes known as Danegeld. You imagine cartloads of coin clinking their way across soggy fields, tribute sent to keep peace. It works, temporarily, but silver is like blood in the water, and the sharks return for more. You try to steady yourself in the chaos. Ethelred attempts reforms, strengthens defenses, even marries Emma of Normandy in a bid to tie English fate with continental stability. But nothing really sticks. In 1002, he orders the infamous St. Brice's Day massacre, a coordinated attempt to kill Danes living in England. It's an act of desperation, and it backfires spectacularly. One of the supposed victims? The sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, King of Denmark. So now the Danes have a personal reason to escalate things. You shake your head as you watch Sweyn land, with an even bigger army. This is no raid. This is invasion. Ethelred flees to Normandy, tail between his legs. Sweyn takes the throne, briefly becoming the first Danish king of England. You blink, it happens so fast. But then Sweyn dies unexpectedly in 1014, and Ethelred returns from exile, hoping maybe no one noticed how bad things got while he was gone. They noticed. The real power now belongs to Sweyn's son, Cnut. Yes, that nut. The one from the story where he orders the sea to stop rising. Spoiler, it doesn't. Historians still argue whether this tale shows his humility or his arrogance, but either way, it makes him memorable. Cnut conquers England properly in 1016 after a brutal war with Ethelred's son, Edmund Ironside. The final clash at Assundun leaves bodies scattered like broken dolls, and afterward a strange truce is declared. Edmund keeps half the kingdom for about 5 minutes, until he dies mysteriously. Suspicious? Absolutely. But Cnut denies everything, looking innocently out to sea. Now Cnut rules all of England, and he doesn't stop there. He controls Denmark, parts of Norway, and even dabbles in Swedish territory. You realize you're now living under the North Sea Empire, a surprising twist in the royal saga, and it's not terrible. Cnut's rule is strong, efficient, and unusually well administered. He keeps many Anglo-Saxon advisors, marries Ethelred's widow Emma to legitimize his rule, and even makes religious donations to English churches. The beard may scream Viking, but the strategy is pure politics. Quirky tidbit. Cnut once gifted a massive golden cross to the shrine of St. Edmund, not out of guilt necessarily, but as a sort of royal insurance policy. You never know when a saint might put in a good word, but like all empires, this one cracks. Cnut dies in 1035, and suddenly the web of alliances unravels. His sons, Harold Harefoot and Harthacnut, squabble over the English throne, and things quickly turn Shakespearean. You suspect someone's getting poisoned at dinner, but there are no surviving dinner menus to confirm it. Eventually, the Danes are ousted. The crown lurches back toward the old Anglo-Saxon line with the ascension of Edward the Confessor in 1042. You breathe cautiously. This feels like a return to familiarity, if not exactly stability. Edward is pious, mild, and about as warlike as a damp sponge. He builds Westminster Abbey, prays a lot, and mostly avoids the kind of brawls that got his predecessors killed. But the real drama is bubbling underneath. Edward dies childless in 1066, and suddenly the English throne is like a hot potato. In a room full of ambitious warlords with buttered fingers, enter Harold Godwinson, England's top noble and Edward's supposed deathbed pick. He's crowned, almost immediately, which seems hasty. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Duke William of Normandy is fuming. He claims Edward promised him the throne years earlier. Plus, he's mad that Harold, who once swore a sacred oath of support, grabbed the crown for himself. You can almost hear William sharpening something. Oh, and while that's brewing, another threat looms from the north. Harold Hardrada of Norway, who also wants a slice. You begin to suspect the English throne is less of a seat and more of a lightning rod. In a frenzied few weeks, Harold Godwinson rushes north, defeats Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, an exhausting victory, and then immediately marches south again to face William. Your boots are soaked, your limbs ache, you've barely rested, and now you're trudging toward Hastings. This won't end well. You're standing on a cold hillside near Hastings, October 1066. The sky's overcast. Your armor itches and you've got blisters in places you didn't know could blister. Harold Godwinson's forces have just marched nearly 250 miles in under 3 weeks. You haven't even had time to scrape the dried blood off your boots from Stamford Bridge. And now, here comes William of Normandy. William isn't here for a diplomatic chat. His army is well-fed, well-rested, and disturbingly enthusiastic about conquest. He's brought cavalry, something your Anglo-Saxon infantry isn't used to dealing with, and he's got papal backing too. That little banner from the Pope means William thinks he's not just invading a kingdom, but delivering divine justice. Battle breaks out on the 14th of October. The English shield wall holds firm at first. You're shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, locked in place like a human dam. But the Normans adapt. They fake retreats, drawing impetuous Saxons out of position. It's like watching your teammates fall for the world's deadliest prank. One by one, the gaps open. Then it happens. An arrow arcs high into the air, too high to aim but not too high to miss. It strikes Harold in the eye, or at least, that's the legend you're told over and over. Historians still argue whether it was really an arrow, a sword, or just battlefield myth-making, but the effect is the same. Harold dies. The English line collapses. You're not just defeated, you're conquered. William the Conqueror claims the throne of England. And if you thought things were chaotic before, buckle up. Almost immediately, William begins reshaping the kingdom in his image. You hear French in court, not Old English. Your local earl is replaced by someone named de Montfort or de Vere, who doesn't know the local customs and doesn't particularly care. William confiscates vast amounts of land. Up to 90% ends up in the hands of Norman elites. If you owned anything before 1066, chances are you don't anymore. The Norman yoke is heavy, and it's deliberate. Castles pop up everywhere like mushrooms after a thunderstorm, projecting dominance from their towering stone walls. You pass by one and feel the silence of power. These aren't just buildings, they're reminders. You are being watched. To really put a bow on his control, William orders the Domesday Book in 1085. It's essentially the most ambitious tax audit in medieval Europe. Officials go village to village, counting livestock, land, mills, even how many pigs you used to own before your neighbor's goat mysteriously trampled your fence. It's so comprehensive that locals call it the Book of Doom. You try not to breathe too loudly when the auditors come through, but William's rule isn't just brutal, it's efficient. He centralizes authority, refines legal processes, and strengthens the monarchy in a way England has never experienced. The crown becomes less a symbol and more a mechanism, a system that can tax, command, and enforce. Quirky tidbit: William had such a temper that when he died in 1087, his body was too large for the stone sarcophagus prepared for him. When monks tried to force it in, his bloated corpse burst. Royal funerals, always a crowd pleaser. He's succeeded first by his son, William II, known as William Rufus because of his red face. Rufus isn't exactly a people's prince. He's brash, fond of hunting, and suspiciously dies in a hunting accident in the New Forest in 1100. Historians still debate whether it was murder, a tragic fluke, or the worst game of hide-and-seek ever recorded. Enter Henry I, another son of William the Conqueror. He's quick to seize the throne, literally. While others are still mourning Rufus or pretending to, Henry runs to Winchester and grabs the royal treasury. You admire the hustle. Henry is a capable ruler. He strengthens royal justice and issues the Charter of Liberties, a sort of precursor to the Magna Carta. But his reign isn't without heartbreak. In 1120, his only legitimate son, William Adelin, drowns in the White Ship disaster, a medieval Titanic situation, only with fewer violins and more screaming nobles. You watch as Henry's legacy vanishes beneath the waves. So now, succession's a mess again. Before he dies in 1135, Henry makes his barons swear to support his daughter Matilda. But when the time comes, they change their minds faster than you can say treason. Stephen of Blois, Henry's nephew, takes the crown. He's charismatic, brave, and only slightly incompetent. What follows is a nightmare. 19 years of civil war known as the Anarchy. You've got barons switching sides like teenagers at a high school dance. Castles burn. Villages are razed. Chronicles describe a kingdom where Christ and his saints slept. And you believe it. You've been dodging arrows, tax collectors, and collapsing roofs for 2 decades. Matilda fights fiercely, even capturing Stephen at one point. But her temper and general disdain for pleasantries lose her support. At one infamous moment, she's smuggled out of Oxford Castle in white cloaks across frozen rivers in the dead of night. Frankly, the kind of thing you'd expect from a thriller movie, not royal succession. Eventually, they reach a compromise. Stephen remains king, but names Matilda's son Henry as his heir. The moment Stephen dies in 1154, young Henry takes the throne as Henry II. You finally exhale. Order returns. For now. You barely have time to stretch your legs before Henry II takes the throne. And suddenly, England's playing at empire again. But not the kind of empire that grows slowly with flags and treaties. This one bursts outward like a wildfire. Henry isn't just king of England. By inheritance and marriage, he controls more land in France than the French king himself. Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine. It's like England fell asleep and woke up as half of Western Europe. You're now living under the Angevin Empire, though no one really calls it that yet. What they do call Henry is intimidating. He's energetic, to the point of mania, prone to sudden fits of rage, and marches across his territories like he's afraid the map might disappear if he doesn't walk every square inch himself. You're exhausted just watching him. His queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine, is no passive consort. She's shrewd, powerful, and easily more interesting than half the kings before her. Once married to the King of France, now married to his rival, she brings not just land, but a legacy of courtly culture and scandal. You hear whispers about poetry, infidelity, and rebellion, all served with a glass of red wine. Together they have 8 children, including 4 sons who all, at some point, try to overthrow Henry. You suspect family dinners are tense, but the early part of Henry's reign shines with reform. He strengthens royal justice, expands the jury system, and tries to clip the wings of feudal barons who've grown fat and lawless since the anarchy. If you're a peasant, it's suddenly easier to find justice in the king's court than in your local lord's hall. Progress? Absolutely. Comfortable? Not really. Then there's Thomas Becket. Once Henry's drinking buddy and political ally, Becket becomes Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162. Henry expects loyalty. Becket delivers defiance. It's like hiring your best friend and then realizing they've discovered religion and suddenly disapprove of everything you do. The tension builds. Becket opposes royal interference in church matters. Henry fumes. At one boiling point, the king allegedly shouts, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 knights take it as a job offer. They storm Canterbury Cathedral and butcher Becket at the altar in 1170. You stand in the nave, stunned. Blood pools on the stone. The news races across Europe like fire across parchment. Henry's forced to do public penance, barefoot, whipped by monks in the rain. Whether it's sincere or PR damage control, you're not sure. Historians still argue how much he really intended the murder. Meanwhile, Eleanor grows increasingly alienated. When Henry imprisons her in 1173 for supporting their sons in rebellion, you sense the royal family has shifted from Shakespearean drama to full-on soap opera. She spends over a decade in captivity, writing letters, plotting quietly, and waiting. Henry II dies in 1189, worn out, betrayed, and alone. His sons had turned against him, his empire is fraying, and the crown passes to his most famous heir, Richard I, known forever as Richard the Lionheart. Cue the fanfare. If you're expecting peace, forget it. Richard barely sets foot in England. He spends most of his reign off fighting in the Third Crusade, locked in a titanic struggle with Saladin in the Holy Land. The stories are epic. Sieges, ambushes, hand-to-hand duels in desert heat. You half expect dragons to appear. Richard is brave, no doubt, but also expensive. He funds his crusade by squeezing England like an orange, selling titles, offices, anything that isn't nailed down. Quirky detail. Richard once declared he'd sell London itself if he could find a buyer. You glance nervously toward the skyline, but the crusade ends without real victory. On his way home, Richard is captured and held for ransom by the Duke of Austria. The cost 150,000 marks, a staggering sum. The entire country has to pitch in. If you had a coin, it probably ended up on a royal cart bound for Germany. Richard finally returns, rules for a few more years, and then dies in 1199 from a crossbow wound during a minor skirmish in France. Not exactly the glorious end you expected. Crown now passes to his brother John. Ah, John, you wince already. John earns his reputation early. Cruel, petty, and fantastically unlucky. He loses most of England's French territories through mismanagement and blunders. Normandy, once the jewel of the empire, is gone by 1204. English nobles start questioning why they're paying taxes for a king who seems better at losing than leading. Then comes the big clash. King John versus the barons. In 1215, they corner him at Runnymede and force him to sign the Magna Carta. It's not freedom for all, sorry peasants, but it does limit royal power and guarantee certain legal rights for the nobility. Think of it as the first time England tells its monarch, no, you can't just do whatever you want. You hear the echo of modern democracy stirring under all that parchment. Of course, John doesn't actually honor the charter. The ink's barely dry before he's asking the Pope to annul it, plunging the country into civil war. It's the kind of chaos where barons call in a French prince to rule England, and for a moment it seems like the crown might slip entirely out of English hands. Then John dies suddenly in 1216, likely from dysentery. Yes, the royal bowels again, and you feel a strange mix of relief and dread. His son is only 9 years old. Long live the boy king, Henry III. You watch with mild panic as the royal scepter is placed into the hand of a 9-year-old. Henry III ascends. The throne in 1216, more crown than crown wearer. The barons, still twitchy from John's reign, could have seized power entirely, but instead, they rally around the boy. Maybe it's the innocence, maybe it's the desperation for stability. Either way, you breathe a little easier. For now. England, still bruised from civil war and a near French takeover, needs peace more than pomp, and young Henry is guided by capable regents, including William Marshal, the seasoned knight who might as well be carved from oak. He holds things together until Henry can rule on his own. You imagine Marshal dying with a sigh, muttering, "You're welcome." Once Henry starts ruling for himself, things get decorative. He's not a warrior like his grandfather or a reformer like his great-grandfather. He's a dreamer, a builder, a man obsessed with ceremony. He pours money into rebuilding Westminster Abbey in Gothic splendor. The place gleams with stained glass and gold leaf, but your taxes do not feel equally inspiring. He's also obsessed with the cult of Edward the Confessor, a Saxon king who lived like a monk and was later sainted. Henry venerates him like a medieval fanboy, even styles himself after him. You wonder if he's trying to cosplay his way into holiness. But the real issue isn't his taste in architecture or saints. It's his politics. He surrounds himself with foreign advisors, especially his French half-brothers, and hands out favors like candy at a medieval parade. The English barons grind their teeth. You grind yours. Enter Simon de Montfort. He's French by birth, but English in ambition. A nobleman with charm, brains, and an inconvenient belief that kings should listen to their subjects. He marries Henry's sister but ends up leading a full-blown rebellion against the crown. You watch as England teeters once again on the edge of noble-led chaos. In 1258, things hit a boiling point. The barons force Henry to accept the provisions of Oxford. a set of reforms that basically stripped the monarchy of unchecked power. There's now a council of barons overseeing the king like babysitters with swords. It's the Magna Carta all over again, with a side of constitutional flair. But of course, compromise doesn't last. Within a few years, civil war erupts. Again, Montfort gains the upper hand and in 1265 calls what many consider the first true English parliament. Not just nobles, but knights and even some commoners get a voice. You tilt your head. It's small, imperfect, but revolutionary. And then de Montfort dies violently at the Battle of Evesham, cut down and mutilated. His body is hacked to pieces. Legend has it his head was sent to Henry's loyalists with his genitals stuffed in his mouth. Too much for bedtime? Possibly. But that's medieval politics for you. More Game of Thrones than PBS special. Still, the idea of Parliament doesn't die with him. It lingers. Henry III limps along in the aftermath, ruling into his late 60s. By the time he dies in 1272, he's reigned for 56 years. That's more than half a century of palace intrigue, decorative chapels, and frustrating indecision. You can't decide if you're bored or impressed. His son, however, will not bore you. Edward III. Now he is a king built for action. You see him return from crusade to take the throne. He's tall, imposing, nicknamed Longshanks, which sounds like a pirate but really just means his legs are extremely inconvenient for medieval furniture. He's sharp, ruthless, and efficient in a way that feels refreshing after decades of royal dithering. His first target? Wales. The Welsh had been resisting English control for centuries. Edward sees this as both an opportunity and a legacy mission. He launches a brutal campaign conquering Wales and building a ring of stone castles to hold it. Conwy, Caernarfon, Harlech. They're gorgeous in that intimidating we own you now kind of way. To seal the conquest symbolically, he has his son born in Caernarfon and declares him the first Prince of Wales. It's a PR move with staying power. You wonder how the baby felt about being used as a national rebrand. Then there's Scotland. Oh dear. At first, Edward is invited to mediate a Scottish succession dispute. He agrees, but only if the Scots acknowledge him as overlord. Some go along. Others bristle. Tension builds. And when the Scots make an alliance with France, England's mortal frenemy, Edward invades. This begins the wars of Scottish independence. You watch Edward crush resistance and execute William Wallace in 1305. Wallace, the guerrilla leader immortalized in tales, and Braveheart, centuries later, is hanged, drawn, and quartered in London. The crowd cheers. You grimace. That's more than just a fringe punishment, it's royal messaging with entrails. Still, Scotland resists. And while Edward crushes rebellion after rebellion, his health declines. He dies in 1307 en route to fight Robert the Bruce, Scotland's new rising star. His dying wish? That his bones be carried into battle. Spoiler, they aren't. Edward the Frere leaves behind a stronger monarchy, centralized justice, and the firm sense that kings should do something. His nickname, Hammer of the Scots, wasn't subtle, but it stuck. His son, Edward II, is a very different story. You shift your weight as Edward II steps into view, and immediately something feels off. His father was all iron will and war horses. Edward II prefers music, pageantry, and hanging out with his handsome best friend. The royal court shifts tone from ironclad discipline to something closer to a medieval soap opera, crossed with a high school clique. And oh, that best friend, Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight, charming, fashionable, and totally unqualified for high office. Edward doesn't care. He showers Piers with titles, lands, and affection. You watch the nobles mutter into their goblets, their brows furrowing with every new gift Edward tosses Gaveston's way. Was it a romantic relationship? Historians still argue whether Edward and Gaveston were lovers or just intensely close friends. What's certain is that Edward flaunts their bond in a way that infuriates the barons and alienates the people who are supposed to help him run the kingdom. The resentment simmers and eventually boils. In 1312, a group of barons captures Gaveston and executes him without royal permission. They don't even pretend it's legal. Edward is devastated. You stand on the sidelines, awkwardly watching a king weep not just for a friend, but for his crumbling authority. But Edward's troubles are just beginning. In 1314, he leads a disastrous campaign into Scotland to face Robert the Bruce, yes, that Bruce, at the Battle of Bannockburn. You'd think he learned something from his dad's obsession with Scotland, but alas, no. Edward's forces are routed in one of the most humiliating defeats in English history. You want to look away, but the chaos is oddly mesmerizing. The Scots reassert independence, Bruce grows into a national hero, and Edward limps back to England, his reputation in tatters. The nobles, already skeptical, now openly disdain him. His marriage to Isabella of France, a smart, capable woman, starts unraveling. She gives him heirs, including the future Edward III, but you can almost hear the emotional chasm yawning between them. And then, he finds a new favorite, Hugh Despenser. The Despensers, father and son, make Gaveston look subtle. They're greedy, vindictive, and utterly unafraid to dominate court life. Edward gives them even more power than he gave peers. Land is seized, nobles are imprisoned, and suddenly you're back in the days of royal favorites ruining everything. The country descends into factional chaos again, like a record stuck on repeat. The barons rebel again. There's fighting in the streets, castles under siege. You're basically back in Civil War territory. But the twist this time, it's Isabella who takes the lead. She's sent to France in 1325 to negotiate with her brother, the French king. Instead of returning, she hooks up with a disgruntled English Lord, Roger Mortimer, and begins planning her husband's downfall. You blink twice. Is this a royal affair and a rebellion? Why, yes. Yes, it is. In 1326, Isabella and Mortimer invade England with a small force. But the country is so fed up with Edward that crowds welcome them. Despenser is captured, horribly executed. If you value sleep, don't Google that. And Edward is forced to abdicate in favor of his 14-year-old son. He's imprisoned, moved from castle to castle, increasingly cut off. In 1327, he dies under mysterious circumstances at Berkeley Castle. The official story is natural causes. The popular rumor is much darker, involving a red-hot poker and, well, we're not doing that one at bedtime. Let's just say scholars remain divided on the truth, and your grateful medieval rumors aren't reality TV. Edward III becomes king in name, but he's still a teenager, and Mortimer is the real power behind the throne, for a while. Then, in a neat bit of revenge drama, Edward III overthrows Mortimer in 1330, at age 17, and takes control. You have to admit, it's kind of satisfying watching the son who watched his father fall finally seize power and say, enough. Edward III's reign begins with blood, but soon shifts to glory. He's clever, warlike, and determined to restore royal prestige. He reigns for 50 years, a staggering feat, and transforms England's international role, kicking off what will become one of the longest and most bitter wars in European history. That's right. Get ready for the 100 Years' War. It's he. All starts with a succession crisis in France. When the French king dies without a direct male heir, Edward, as the grandson of a former French king through his mother, claims the French throne. France disagrees. Naturally, they invoke Salic, law which says women can't pass on claims to the crown. Edward calls this nonsense, straps on his armor, and sails across the Channel. The war kicks off in 1337. You brace yourself. This isn't a tidy conflict. It's an on-again, off-again mess of sieges, naval battles, and political chess, waged over multiple generations. But early on, Edward scores some incredible wins. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, the English longbow proves devastating. Picture a storm of arrows blotting out the sun, French knights charging straight into the meat grinder. The carnage is almost abstract. You want to root for the skill of it, but your stomach turns a little at the bodies piling up. And if that weren't enough, Edward's son, called the Black Prince, makes his mark with similar flair. He's young, dashing, and as deadly as his nickname suggests. Together, they capture Calais and bring France to its knees. And then, the Black Death arrives. In 1348, a rat sneezes somewhere in Europe, and suddenly half the population is dying in agony. You feel it all around you. The dread, the silence, the carts of corpses. Whole villages vanish. The plague doesn't care if you're a serf or a bishop or the king's barber. It kills indiscriminately. Edward tries to keep order, but how do you govern a ghost country? By the time it passes, up to a third of England is dead. Entire generations are missing from family trees. Labor becomes scarce. Serfs start demanding wages. The seeds of change are sown in the plague's wake, even if the monarchy doesn't realize it yet. But Edward survives, and he keeps fighting France well into his old age. He dies in 1377, having secured his dynasty, but also drained the nation. His heir, the Black Prince, dies before him, so the throne passes to a boy again. Here we go. Another young king. Say hello to Richard II, anarchy in a crown. Matilda versus Stephen, a queen nearly grabs the throne, but you're caught in a civil war that turns nobles into petty tyrants. You shuffle through muddy fields and smoldering villages, ears ringing from the clash of steel that never seems to stop. It's the 12th century, and you're in the middle of what chroniclers would later call the anarchy, and not in the fun punk rock way. This is chaos with chainmail, sparked by a broken promise, a headstrong empress, and a throne up for grabs. The trouble starts with King Henry I, a man who, despite burying a few too many enemies and a son or two, held things together. His only legitimate son, William, drowns in the White Ship disaster of 1120. You would think this tragedy might cool the royal ambitions, but no. Henry, scrambling for a backup plan, makes his barons swear loyalty to his daughter Matilda, also known as Empress Maud, thanks to her earlier marriage to the Holy Roman Emperor. Now you may think having a queen sounds progressive, but medieval, nobles had the same look you'd give a raccoon driving a tractor. A woman, ruling alone, in chainmail, hard pass. Still, Henry pushes the point until his death in 1135. That's when Stephen of Blois, Henry's nephew, and conveniently male, makes his move. Despite having sworn loyalty to Matilda, he scoots over to London, charms the bishops, and gets crowned in record time. You're barely catching your breath when Matilda lands in England in 1139, cloak billowing and temper flaring. She's not amused. You follow her to Arundel Castle, where she tries diplomacy, then war, then really awkward family dinners. For nearly 2 decades, England slides into a grim carnival of sieges, betrayals, and noble opportunists building mini-kingdoms. This isn't a tidy war with sides and honor. No, this is chaos. You walk past burned-out churches turned into makeshift barracks, crops stolen before harvest, peasants muttering curses no priest would dare translate. Baron A sacks Baron B's manor on Monday, dines with him by Friday, and does it again next week. Castles pop up like stubborn weeds, built fast and without royal permission, just daring someone to care. Matilda has her moments. In 1141, her forces capture Stephen at the Battle of Lincoln, and for a brief, shimmering moment you think it's over. She marches into London to claim the crown, and the city slams its gates in her face. Turns out calling local nobles traitors and ingrates isn't great PR. She flees in a rush, and Stephen's allies rescue him like it's a scene from a medieval buddy comedy. Through it all, Matilda shows grit. There's that famous winter escape from Oxford Castle. She dons a white cloak and slips past enemy lines across snow-covered fields like a ghost in the moonlight. If this were a Netflix special, that's your slow-motion highlight. Yet despite her bravery, charisma isn't her strong suit. Matilda is brilliant, proud, and terrifying in negotiations. But her style, imperious, impatient, and often just plain rude, makes enemies fast. Many nobles prefer a weak king they can manipulate, hi Stephen, over a strong woman who might actually boss them around. Historians still argue whether England could have accepted a queen if Matilda had just smiled more, or if the barons would have balked regardless. Either way, you're stuck in the middle. Trade dries up. Roads are no longer safe. You hear whispered rumors of Christ and his saints sleeping, as one monk puts it. No law, no justice, just warlords with varying hygiene standards. As the years grind on, something shifts. Matilda never becomes queen, but her son, young Henry of Anjou, starts looking like a better bet. Smart, charismatic, and endlessly ambitious, he's being groomed from afar. You spot him on occasional visits, a teen with too many teeth and too much confidence. The nobles begin to whisper that maybe it's time to bet on the next generation. By the early 1150s, everyone's tired. Even Stephen. His own son Eustace dies suddenly. Poisoned, say some, though that's probably just castle gossip. And with grief dulling his ambitions, Stephen agrees to a compromise. In 1153, the Treaty of Winchester names young Henry as his heir, skipping over his own surviving children. You breathe a shaky sigh as the dust settles. No grand declarations, no glittering coronation for Matilda. She retires to Normandy, still steely-eyed but satisfied. She never wore the crown, but her bloodline will. You wonder if that was the plan all along. And as Stephen dies in 1154, England gets a fresh monarch, Henry II, young, driven, and about to stir things up even more. You walk the legal tightrope as Henry reforms justice, loses his temper, and maybe, just maybe, kills an archbishop. You're back on firmer ground, well, as firm as 12th century England ever gets. The anarchy has cooled, the nobles have stopped looting each other's chickens for sport, and now you're watching a young king climb onto the throne like it's a siege tower. Meet Henry II, part lion, part lawyer, part caffeine-fueled control freak. The Plantagenet dynasty has officially begun, and you're going to need a sturdy pair of boots to keep up. Henry II is Matilda's son and the first of what will be a long line of Plantagenet kings. He comes to the throne in 1154 with a sharp mind, boundless energy, and a glaring to-do list. First order of business? Smash down all those unauthorized pop-up castles the barons built during the chaos. You watch with some satisfaction. As stone after stone gets hauled away, the message loud and clear. There's a new sheriff in town, and he has legal parchment. That's Henry for you. The man is obsessed with order. He doesn't just rule with swords, he rules with scrolls. You trail him through courtrooms and council halls as he overhauls the legal system. Juries replace trial by ordeal. Eyewitness testimony becomes more reliable than, say, dunking someone in a river to see if they float. It's revolutionary stuff and honestly pretty refreshing, unless you're the one on trial. You're also dragged into the drama of his family, which is so dysfunctional, it could carry its own reality show. Henry marries Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman as clever as she is politically dangerous. Together they control more territory in France than the French king himself, which you'll agree is awkward. They also produce a brood of future backstabbers, rebels, and one legendary Lionheart. But before all that, there's the small matter of an archbishop and a murder in a church. Enter Thomas Becket. Once Henry's drinking buddy and chancellor, he's promoted, perhaps unwisely, to Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162. Henry expects a puppet. What he gets is a man who suddenly takes his religious vows way too seriously. Becket transforms overnight, from fun-loving courtier to solemn defender of church rights. You can practically hear Henry grinding his teeth from here. The two clash over who gets to try criminus clerks, that is, clergy who commit crimes. Henry wants them tried in royal courts like everyone else. Becket insists only the church has that authority. The argument escalates until Becket flees to France in dramatic fashion, robes fluttering, probably muttering Latin insults under his breath. They make a reluctant peace in 1170. Becket returns to England. You hold your breath. Then, just weeks later, Henry, possibly during one of his famous rants, mutters something like, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 knights take it literally. Cue one of the most infamous scenes in British history. Becket, hacked down inside Canterbury Cathedral, his blood and brain staining holy stone. You flinch. England does too. The knights become outlaws. Henry panics, dons sackcloth, and crawls to Becket's tomb for penance while barefoot monks flog him. Not exactly your typical press release, but it does the job. Historians still argue whether Henry meant for Becket to die, or if his words were just an angry outburst misinterpreted by overzealous nobles desperate to impress. Either way, Becket becomes a saint, and Henry learns that even kings must choose their words carefully when church walls are listening. Despite the scandal, Henry's reforms continue shaping England. You notice people traveling on more predictable roads, knowing what justice looks like before a verdict is read. The Assize of Clarendon in 1166 strengthens the use of juries, and itinerant justices start roaming the countryside. It's not quite modern rule of law, but it's miles ahead of trial by scorpion. But Henry doesn't stop with courts. He's constantly moving, rarely sleeping in the same castle for more than a few days. You follow him through France, where he inspects estates with maddening thoroughness, and into Wales and Ireland, where his ambition sometimes outpaces his diplomacy. He tries to bring Ireland into the fold by backing an English lord, but the outcome is messy at best. You wonder if anyone ever told Henry no and lived comfortably afterward. The real cracks form at home. His sons, especially the fiery Richard and the jealous John, resent his tight control. Eleanor? She eventually supports a full-blown rebellion against him. You gape as Henry ends up imprisoning his own wife. Family dinners are tense, and yet Henry never stops working, even as his body betrays him in later years. Racked by illness, heartache, and betrayal, he keeps dictating letters, chasing treaties, and dragging kings to his will. He dies in 1189, heartbroken and abandoned by his surviving sons. His last words, Reportedly a bitter curse aimed at John, who'd betrayed him most. You nod. That tracks. Still, Henry II leaves behind a monarchy that's smarter, sharper, and more grounded than what he inherited. The crown isn't just ornamental anymore, it's wrapped in law, bound by precedent, and backed by administration. But next up, Richard the Lionheart. Less courtroom, more crusade. With one brother crusading and the other wrecking everything, you cling to the parchment that tries to save the realm. You tighten your belt and hitch a ride on the back of a supply wagon bound. For yet another siege, you're going to be doing a lot of that. It's the late 12th century, and England's been handed to a king who spends more time on horseback than on the throne. Meet Richard the Fur, better known as Richard the Lionheart. The man is a walking legend with a sword for a best friend and a knack for vanishing the moment anything remotely administrative shows up on his desk. When Richard takes the crown in 1189, you think maybe things will settle down after the stormy end of his father's reign. Spoiler, they don't. Richard's got crusading on his brain. Within months, he's off to the Holy Land with an army in tow, leaving England in the hands of, let's call them delegates. His mother Eleanor, ever the mastermind, helps smooth things over, but it's clear, this king sees England less as a homeland and more as a very lucrative ATM. Before he goes, Richard sets up his brother John with some land to keep him busy. Not a brilliant plan. John is younger, ambitious, and has the subtlety of a trebuchet. You can practically see the future unraveling as the two brothers eye each other sideways over dinner. You sigh. Again, with the sibling rivalry. You join the rumor mill in London while Richard dazzles Europe on the Third Crusade. Yes, he wins battles. Yes, he's brave. And yes, he's also captured by Leopold of Austria on the way home, and ransomed for a sum so huge it makes your eyes water. Nearly every family in England coughs up something. Coins, silver, even church plate gets melted down. You may not see him in person, but your purse certainly feels his presence. Back in England, John is supposed to behave himself during Richard's absence. Instead, he flirts with rebellion. The nobles watch, arms crossed, as John starts claiming castles and forging alliances. When Richard finally returns in 1194, he's not amused, but he also doesn't have the energy to punish his brother much. Richard's attention remains fixed on his French holdings and his military pursuits. And then in 1199, boom, Richard is dead, killed by a crossbow bolt during a minor siege over a treasure that may not have even existed. You whisper a quick prayer for his soul, and for the poor surgeon who dared to dig out the arrow. He reportedly messed up badly. Now it's John's turn. King John. The name alone practically groans with foreshadowing. If England had Yelp, his reign would be lucky to score 2 stars. From the start, it's rough. John loses huge chunks of territory in France, Normandy included. It's like he sneezes and half the Angevin Empire flies away. You wander through ports where soldiers return home confused and bitter. The barons start muttering. The crown feels wobblier. John also tangles with the church, which is always a bold choice. When he refuses to accept the Pope's nominee for Archbishop of Canterbury, Pope Innocent III responds with an interdict. That means no church services, no marriages, no last rites. You watch as funerals pause mid-procession, weddings are postponed, and babies go unbaptized. People panic. It's the Middle Ages. This stuff matters. John eventually backs down, even going so far as to make England a papal fief. Technically, that means the Pope becomes John's landlord. You stare at the parchment and wonder if he read the fine print. But the breaking point? Money. Always money. John squeezes his barons dry. Inheritance taxes, scutage payments, basically a fine to skip military service, even forced loans. You pass by a noble estate gutted by debt and hear whispered curses naming the king directly. This is not going well, so the barons push back. In 1215, they gather at Runnymede, just west of London, and shove a charter under John's very reluctant nose. You hear the ink splatter as he signs it. Magna Carta, the Great Charter. It's not exactly a beacon of human rights. Mostly, it's a list of privileges for barons, but it plants a very stubborn seed. The idea that the king is not above the law. The charter demands fair trials, no illegal imprisonment, and limits on feudal payments. Historians still argue whether John ever intended to honor it. Probably not. But its existence shifts the entire vibe of kingship. For the first time, you feel the monarchy start to strain under actual expectations. Predictably, John backpedals. Almost immediately, civil war breaks out. French troops land in England invited by rebel barons. It's absolute chaos. Again, you duck into monasteries for shelter and overhear monks praying for anyone but John. Then, in 1216, the chaos solves itself. John dies. Reportedly from dysentery or eating too many peaches and drinking too much cider, if you prefer your history with a little flair. You exhale. Hard. His son, Henry III, is just 9 years old. You glance at the tiny new king and wonder if he'll be able to patch up the mess. But that's for tomorrow. For now, you stand with the other weary subjects of the realm and cling to the idea inked at Runnymede, that somewhere, in some dusty archive, there's a piece of parchment that dares to say, enough. Scotland resists. Wales is subdued, and you feel the sharp edge of medieval imperialism, all under one very tall king. You adjust your cloak. Thicker this time. It's getting colder, windier, and distinctly more mountainous. That's right. You're headed to the edges of England's power, and Edward the Fern is in the mood to redraw borders. This king is tall, 6'2", towering in an age when most people don't clear 5.5. You watch his shadow stretch across the land, long and lean, just like his ambition. Edward the Rhine inherits the crown in 1272, after his father Henry III's long and somewhat underwhelming reign. You probably missed most of it. There were baronial revolts, a flirtation with a sort of constitution, and some spectacular church building. But now the grown-up is back in charge, and Edward is nothing if not decisive. Right away he sets about reinforcing royal authority. You feel the chill of power concentrating. He reforms Parliament, yes, but don't get too excited. It's still mostly barons and bishops with a sprinkling of knights and burgesses. This isn't democracy, it's damage control. Edward doesn't just want to rule, he wants to conquer. First stop, Wales. You trudge along behind royal armies as they march west into a tangle of hills, castles, and extremely stubborn princes. Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, the last true Prince of Wales, holds out as long as he can. But Edward is relentless. Stone by stone, he builds massive fortresses, Caernarfon, Conwy, Harlech, all as if saying, try rebelling now, why don't you? These castles are not just military installations, they're statements. You shiver as Caernarfon Castle rises. Styled after Roman architecture, its polygonal towers practically daring you to question the king's authority. In 1282, Llywelyn is killed in a skirmish. Edward orders his severed head sent to London, where it's crowned with ivy and placed on a pike. You grimace. Subtlety was never his strong suit. To cement control, Edward gives his newborn son the title Prince of Wales, a political masterstroke if ever there was one. You squint at the baby and think, well, good luck with that. With Wales subdued, for now, Edward turns his gaze north, Scotland. Here, things get messy fast. The Scottish king dies without a clear heir, and Edward is invited to help settle. The succession. You know where this is going. He selects John Balliol, then treats him like a vassal, undermines his rule, and all but dares him to rebel. John Balliol, Tomb Tabard, or Empty Coat as the Scots mockingly call him, eventually does rebel. Edward responds with fire. He invades Scotland in 1296, loots the treasury, and carries off the stone of Scone, the sacred coronation stone of Scottish kings. He carts it back to Westminster Abbey and installs it under his own throne. You sigh, again with the symbolic flexing. But Scotland is no easy conquest. In 1297, a name echoes through the Glens. William Wallace. You might know him better through Hollywood's slightly loose interpretation, but in reality, Wallace is a minor knight who becomes a very real thorn in England's side. You join a nervous English camp before the Battle of Stirling Bridge, and watch astonished as a smaller Scottish force routs a much larger English army. Wallace is declared guardian of Scotland. You want to believe in the romance of it, but England is already regrouping. Edward returns in 1298 and defeats Wallace at Falkirk. Using Welsh longbowmen and brutal efficiency, Wallace goes underground. A few years later, he's captured, dragged to London, and, brace yourself, horrifically executed. We won't linger, but it involves drawing and quartering and more guts than anyone should see on a Tuesday. Still, the rebellion continues. Another name rises, Robert the Bruce. You briefly admire his audacity, particularly when he murders a rival in a church and still somehow wins support. Bruce will soon become the heart of Scottish resistance, but Edward won't live to see that. Final reckoning. Because Edward, while campaigning in the north, finally begins to falter. In 1307, at age 68, he dies near the Scottish border, still on the move, still trying to subdue a country that refuses to kneel. According to legend, he asks that his bones be carried into battle against the Scots. You glance at the cart with his remains and decide that's not a load you'd want to be responsible for. Historians still argue whether Edward was a brilliant strategist or a ruthless tyrant. Likely, he was both. His legacy is complex: a skilled lawgiver who standardized English justice, and a hard-edged imperialist who believed in ruling through stone walls and severed heads. You find yourself torn, awed by his ambition, but weary of the bloodshed it left in its wake. Oh, and let's not forget, Edward also expelled the Jews from England in 1290, after decades of increasing restrictions and scapegoating. You watch silently as families are forced onto boats, their homes confiscated, their communities erased. It's a dark and painful moment, one of many that rarely gets gilded in the royal retellings. By the time his son, Edward II, takes the throne, you're exhausted. The crown has grown heavier, not just in gold, but in expectation, violence, and legacy. Edward I's reign has stretched the kingdom's muscles, but also thinned its patience. And his son? Let's just say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but it rolls downhill quite a bit. The Black Death changes everything, and you shuffle through a kingdom where even serfs dare to talk back. You pull your hood tighter as a foul wind sweeps through the countryside. Something's wrong, deeply wrong. England in the mid-14th century feels different now. Edgy, brittle, the kind of brittle that cracks, not bends. You've been following Edward III's reign, which started in 1327 after his rather underwhelming father Edward II was nudged off the throne, Red deposed, and possibly murdered in very undignified fashion. But as glorious as some of Edward III's reign has been, knights, battles, chivalry, you're not here for pageantry, you're here for plague. It starts, as all apocalypses seem to, with whispers, a ship or two docking in the south, its crew already dead or dying. Then it spreads. Fast. Too fast. The year is 1348, and you're officially in the front row for the Black Death. Lucky you. At first, the symptoms seem like a rough fever. Then comes the vomiting. Then the buboes. Those black swollen lumps in the armpits and groin. People die in 2 days, sometimes less. You've seen death, but not like this. Graves can't be dug fast enough. Churches overflow. Entire villages empty out overnight. You pass cart after cart piled high with the nameless dead. At the height of it, perhaps a third to half of England's population dies. Let that sink in. Every second or third person you know, gone. You barely remember their names. And here's the part that rewires your world. Suddenly, peasants matter. With so many workers dead, labor becomes incredibly valuable. You watch landlords beg former serfs to return, offering better pay, shorter hours, even freedom from some obligations. This is new, this is power. For people who'd been born into a system where you owed your life to a lord just for standing on his dirt, it feels like someone kicked open the door and handed you a pair of boots. Edward III and Parliament panic. They passed the Statute of Laborers in 1351, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and force people back into their old roles. You see it for what it is, a fear law, a desperate ink and parchment attempt to stuff the genie back in its bottle. But the social fabric is already fraying. And it's not just the working class who are cranky. The aristocracy has taken hits too. Dwindling incomes, too few heirs, more taxes. You can practically hear the hinges of feudalism starting to creak. In the cities, guilds rise in power. You smell the sweet scent of fresh bread as bakers in London unionize to protect their rights. You see young women running textile looms, not as unpaid daughters, but as wage-earning workers. You lean in. Something's shifting. Even religion feels different. With so many dead, the church's answers suddenly sound shallow. You hear whispers. Why didn't the prayers work? Why did God let entire monasteries vanish overnight? Flagellants roam the streets, whipping themselves in search of divine mercy. Meanwhile, some clergy vanish altogether, fleeing cities, abandoning their flocks. You used to kneel in reverence. Now, you frown in doubt, and into this strange, reeking, barely recovering world walks John Wycliffe. The Oxford scholar questions church wealth, criticizes corruption and scandal alert, starts translating the Bible into English. You're not supposed to read scripture on your own. That's for priests. But Wycliffe thinks God speaks your language too. You pass a handwritten Bible in Middle English, its ink still fresh, and feel like you're holding dynamite. The church is not amused, but the seeds of reform are sown, even if it'll take centuries and a whole new monarch with marital issues to bloom into something permanent. Still, the real bang? That's coming from below. In 1381, you feel a pressure cooker whistle. England's been taxing peasants harder and harder to fund wars with France. Because, yes, the 100 Years' War is rumbling in the background, dragging on like a medieval soap opera. But now a poll tax, flat and universal, even the poorest must pay, is the last straw. You trudge toward London with a mass of rebels led by Wat Tyler, a name you'll remember. Priests like John Ball shout sermons to the crowd, warning that when Adam delved and Eve span, who is then the gentleman? It's bold. It's dangerous. It's echoing in every village. The peasants' revolt explodes. You march beside them as they storm the capital, burning tax records, killing officials, and even dragging the Archbishop of Canterbury out of the Tower of London to execute him in the street. It's lawless. It's furious. And for a moment it feels like a revolution. Then comes the calm voice of a teenager. King Richard II, only 14 at the time, rides out to meet the rebels. You squint at his golden curls and wonder if he's brave, or just clueless. He promises reforms. The crowd cheers. You believe him, just for a moment. Then, of course, Wat Tyler is killed in a scuffle during a second meeting. The promises evaporate like mist on a spring morning. The revolt is crushed. Heads roll, literally. Still, something's changed. Though the rebellion fails, the system can't quite snap back. Serfdom begins to die out. Wages rise. Lords lease land rather than demand forced labor. You find yourself negotiating pay for harvest work, not begging for bread. It's not utopia, but it's not the old world either. Historians still argue whether the Black Death caused the end of feudalism, or if it just sped up changes that were already underway. You just know that, after this, the air smells different. It still stinks, sure. There are dead rats and open gutters, but under it all is something new. The scent of unrest, of upward pressure, of people who no longer bow quite so easily. You tie your shoes tighter. The world may not have ended in 1348, but it sure doesn't look the same anymore. France and England won't stop fighting, and you're stuck watching kings come and go like poorly written sequels. You roll your eyes as yet another French village burns, another English prince rides into battle, and yet another king claims to be the rightful ruler of a kingdom across the channel. Welcome to the 100 Years' War. A title that sounds neat and tidy, but really it's a chaotic tangle of grudges, broken treaties, awkward coronations, and epic meltdowns that stretch from 1337 to 1453. Yes, over a century. No, it doesn't. Go smoothly. The whole thing starts predictably with a family drama. Back in 1328, the French king dies without a direct male heir. Edward III of England, remember him from the plague-riddled last chapter, says, "Hey, my mom was a French princess, so I've got a claim." The French are not amused. They pass over Ed in favor of a cousin, Philip VI, and England responds like any jilted royal would. War. You trudge alongside Edward's troops as they march into France. At first, it's less about grand conquest and more about raiding, pillaging the countryside, torching crops, causing general mayhem. But then comes Crécy, 1346. You're there, standing behind the English longbowmen as arrows rain down in terrifying, elegant arcs. The French cavalry charges and then falls. Again and again. It's a bloodbath, and the longbow proves it can turn peasant archers into kingslayers. Not long after, you follow Edward's son, the Black Prince. We don't know if he actually wore black, but it sounds cool, as he leads another dramatic victory at Poitiers in 1356. There, they actually capture the French king, as in, "Hi, we're taking your king and locking him in the tower for a bit." Not great for French morale. Still, nobody wins yet. The war comes in bursts. Truces, treaties, betrayals. It's like binge-watching a show that keeps replacing its lead actor and never fully explains why. Back in England, Edward III starts fading, and in 1377 you blink as his 10-year-old grandson becomes Richard II. You remember him, the teen king from the peasants' revolt. Well, he never really grows into the job. He's poetic, moody, and surrounded by flatterers. His reign unravels like a sweater tugged too hard. Meanwhile, the war drags on, France regroups, and suddenly England's grip loosens. Towns are lost, allies defect, money dries up. You sigh as taxes rise again and once loyal barons start sharpening their knives. Not metaphorically, literally. By 1399, Richard II is deposed. Yet again England swaps kings, this time for his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, who becomes Henry IV. It's a shaky throne. You watch him battle rebellions, sickness, and guilt over usurping the crown. He looks over his shoulder a lot. Can't blame him. Then comes his son Henry V in 1413. This is the guy Shakespeare loves. And honestly, you get it. Henry V is sharp, charismatic, and battle-ready. You stand beside him at Agincourt in 1415. Mud sucking at your boots, rain falling sideways. French knights bogged down in their own armor like overturned turtles. Once again, the English longbow earns its legend. Against all odds, England wins. Big. French nobles are either dead, captured, or just embarrassed. Henry rides home a hero, and then he marries a French princess, Catherine of Valois. Suddenly, it looks like peace might be real. Under the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, Henry is even declared heir to the French throne. You raise an eyebrow. Is this how it ends? England wins? Spoiler, no. Henry V dies young in 1422. So does the French king, Charles VI. And suddenly, you're stuck with a weird situation. A baby, Henry VI, is king of both England and France. But only technically. In practice, France doesn't want him. Especially not when Joan of Arc, the 17-year-old peasant girl turned armored icon, rides into history with heavenly visions and contagious courage. You're not sure what to make of Joan. She doesn't fit the script. But you watch her lift the siege of Orléans in 1429, boost French morale, and help Charles VII reclaim his crown. Her capture, trial, and burning at the stake in 1431 is hard to watch. Even harder, realizing it doesn't end the war. France keeps pushing back. England loses ground. And Henry VI? Not a strong ruler. He's gentle, pious, and mentally unstable. The kingdom flounders under weak leadership and noble infighting. You squint at the growing tension, recognizing the setup for yet another power struggle. Historians still argue whether the 100 Years' War was a true single conflict or just a series of dynastic disputes with occasional timeouts for plague and politics. You don't care what they call it. You've just lived through sieges, betrayals, battlefield mud, and more crown swapping than a royal costume party. Finally, in 1453, England loses Bordeaux, its last major French holding. Except for Calais, which will cling on a bit longer, the dream of an English France is dead. You lean against a crumbling wall listening to the wind. The war is over. But the mess it leaves behind? Oh, that's only just beginning. You cheer at Agincourt, but even victory can't fix the chaos his early death leaves behind. The drums still echo in your ears from Agincourt. Mud, blood, and longbows. It's all still vivid. You can't help but replay it. Henry V standing tall, cloak damp with mist, helmet tucked beneath one arm like a casual afterthought. His troops outnumbered, out-armored, and yet they win. The French crumble. It's a story so neat it almost feels scripted, but you know better. Real history doesn't roll credits. It resets the chessboard. So when Henry V returns to England, triumphant and practically glowing with divine approval, you expect a golden age. Instead, you get the royal equivalent of a hard drive crash. First, there's the marriage to Catherine of Valois. It's strategic, yes, but it's also genuinely popular. She's young, clever, and a bit mysterious. Plus, it seals Henry's claim to the French throne thanks to the Treaty of Troyes. England now technically owns half of France. You grin as celebrations erupt across London. The pubs are full. The nobles are smug. The chroniclers write it all down like prophecy fulfilled. And then, in 1422, just 2 years later, Henry dies. Dysentery, they say. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe fate. He's 35. You watch the candle-lit hall dim as news spreads. People don't scream. They just fall silent. All hope sucked out of the room like air from a bell jar. Meanwhile, over in France, Charles VI, Catherine's dad, also dies. So now, by treaty, Henry's infant son is king of both England and France. King Henry VI, aged 9 months. You raise a skeptical eyebrow. A baby ruling 2 war-torn kingdoms? This isn't going to go well. And you'd be right. Henry VI grows up quiet, bookish, and deeply religious, the kind of boy who prays for hours and prefers sermons to swordplay. Not ideal for a medieval king, especially one expected to hold down a foreign throne. You drift behind his court, watching his regents squabble like kids on a playground. There's the Duke of Gloucester, his protector, Cardinal Beaufort, scheming behind cathedral walls, the Duke of Bedford, busy trying to keep the French from burning everything again. While England dithers, France regroups. That's when you hear the whispers of a girl, not noble, not educated, but burning with conviction and apparently hearing voices. Enter Joan of Arc, a peasant teen from Domremy, who insists saints are directing her to kick the English out. And somehow, she does. You're there when she lifts. The Siege of Orleans in 1429, her banner held high, the French rallying behind her like she's a walking miracle. You watch stunned as she leads Charles VII to be crowned in Rheims. The symbolism is thick, divine favor, reclaimed legitimacy, the winds shifting against England. Naturally, the English are less impressed. You shift uncomfortably as Joan is captured by the Burgundians, French allies to the English, then sold to the English, tried for heresy, and burned at the stake in 1431. The flames flicker in your nightmares, but her legacy ignites something even stronger: belief. The French won't give up again. Meanwhile, Henry VI finally reaches adulthood, and it's awkward. He's sweet, no doubt, builds colleges, funds libraries, tries to be a moral compass. But leadership? Not so much. His mind begins to slip, fits of catatonia, lost time, whole days where he stares at walls while nobles govern in his name. Historians still argue whether Henry suffered from inherited mental illness, possibly the same that plagued his grandfather, Charles VI. Whatever the diagnosis, it's clear: Henry can't manage the job. And without a strong monarch, the nobility starts eyeing the crown like it's a shiny bauble in an unattended shop window. Meanwhile, England's grip on France starts snapping, link by link. Towns fall, allies defect. And in 1453, same year as the fall of Constantinople, the Battle of Castillon ends it all. England loses Gascony, its last major stronghold in France. Except for Calais, everything Henry V fought for is gone. Poof. 100 Years' War? Done. France wins. Sort of. You slump against a cold stone wall in Westminster, trying to process the whiplash. 1 generation ago, England was crowning itself King of France. Now, broke, bruised, and bitter, soldiers return home angry and unemployed. Taxes soar, the court is corrupt, and the king? He's curled up on the floor whispering psalms. And that's where the next crisis begins to simmer, because Henry VI, for all his piety, has no control. And worse, he has no strong heir. His only son, Edward of Westminster, is born late into the drama. Meanwhile, powerful noble families, especially the House of York, start to grumble about how, maybe, just maybe, they'd do a better job running things. You sigh. Here we go again. You survived Crécy, Poitiers, Agincourt. But the next war? It won't be about France, it'll be family. And you are very much still stuck in the middle. York and Lancaster keep switching crowns like toddlers with toys. And you just want one king to stay in place. You barely get a breath after the 100 Years' War ends before England turns on itself. The soil's still muddy from Gascony, the treasury's tapped, and half the nobles seem to be practicing for their own version of the crown-wearing Olympics. You brace yourself, because now comes one of the messiest royal soap operas in English history, The Wars of the Roses. Picture this: 2 branches of the Plantagenet family, York and Lancaster, both descended from Edward III, both convinced they've got the better claim to the throne. And their family crest colors? White rose for York, red rose for Lancaster. So naturally, everyone thinks of this period as a flowery Game of Thrones. But don't let the poetic title fool you. This is less romantic floral skirmish, more blood-soaked cousin chaos. You're still rubbing your eyes from watching Henry fumble his way through kingship. His mental breakdown in 1453 is the final straw. The kingdom needs leadership, and his wife, Margaret of Anjou, tries to hold things together. She's fierce, politically shrewd, and fiercely protective of her son Edward, but she's also deeply unpopular. Many think she's the real ruler behind the scenes. Enter Richard, Duke of York. He's got royal blood, loads of ambition, and enough nobles on his side to start poking at the throne. In 1455, at the First Battle of St. Albans, York's forces clash with the king's, and you realize this isn't just a dispute anymore. This is civil war, and it doesn't stop there. Over the next 3 decades, you're dodging swords, switching allegiances, and trying to keep track of who's king this week. There are so many back and forths it starts to feel like England is being run by a particularly indecisive group of wedding planners. Henry VI is deposed, then restored, then deposed again. You wince every time his portrait is pulled off a wall, only to be rehung with hopeful reverence later. Edward IV, a dashing Yorkist and son of Richard of York, takes the throne in 1461. He's tall, handsome, and surprisingly good at both battle and PR. You kind of hope he'll bring some calm, but then he marries for love, gasp, choosing the widowed commoner Elizabeth Woodville instead of making a nice, convenient political match. The nobility, not thrilled. Her large family gains power fast, sparking resentment. The nobility grumbles louder. And then there's Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, also known as the Kingmaker. He switches sides more than a tennis ball, first helping Edward IV rise, then turning on him when politics sour, and even briefly restoring Henry VI just to prove he can. You can't tell if he's a political genius or just bored. Historians still argue whether Warwick truly believed in his causes or just liked stirring the pot. Either way, he dies in 1471 at the Battle of Barnet, and with him, the old guard begins to fade. Edward IV reclaims the throne, stronger than before. You exhale, thinking maybe, just maybe, this is the calm after the storm. Edward rules until 1483, and then drops dead unexpectedly. Uh-oh. Now things get really awkward. Edward's heir is a 12-year-old boy, Edward Fee. But before his coronation, his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, steps in to help. You've seen this movie before. Richard seizes power, declares Edward and his younger brother illegitimate, and takes the crown for himself as Richard III. The young princes, they're taken to the Tower of London, and then vanish. You pace. The cobbles beneath the tower's looming shadow, wondering what really happened. Rumors swirl. Whispers point fingers. Some say Richard had them killed. Others claim they were smuggled out and lived in secret. The mystery remains unsolved, and the phrase "princes in the tower" becomes shorthand for royal intrigue and tragedy. Meanwhile, in exile, a distant Lancaster relative, Henry Tudor, gathers support. His claim is flimsy, but after years of turmoil, not being Richard III turns out to be a pretty solid political strategy. At Bosworth Field, 1485, you crouch beside the marsh as swords clash and banners fall. Richard charges directly into battle, crown pinned to his helmet like an aggressive name tag. He's killed in the chaos. Legend says he shouted, "A horse, my kingdom for a horse." Whether that's true or just Shakespeare being dramatic, you'll never know. Henry Tudor wins. He becomes Henry VII, marries Elizabeth of York, and merges the feuding houses into one new dynasty, the Tudors. A red and white rose becomes the new symbol, peace at last. But the ghosts of the Wars of the Roses linger. You still hear the echo of galloping hooves and clanging steel, and you wonder how long peace can really last, especially with a family like the Tudors in charge. You tiptoe into the new Tudor era, and everything feels a bit calculated. After decades of war, suspicion, and enough cousin-on-cousin violence. To fill a true crime series, Henry VII takes the throne in 1485, not with a grand flourish, but with a deep, wary breath. You're watching a man who knows exactly how fragile his victory is, and you can feel it in every measured glance he casts from beneath that famously furrowed brow. The Battle of Bosworth Field has just ended, and with it, the dynastic squabbling, known as the Wars of the Roses. Richard III lies lifeless in a muddy ditch, and centuries later you'll laugh when his skeleton turns up under a parking lot. Henry Tudor, the obscure exile with a shaky claim, is now king. He's not flashy, he's not adored, but he's alive, and he's clever, and you quickly learn that those two qualities will take a Tudor very, very far. Your first few years under Henry VII are tense. He marries Elizabeth of York. Smart move, really. She's the daughter of Edward IV and niece of that ill-fated Richard III, so their union neatly ties a bow around the feuding York and Lancaster factions. It's like a royal peace treaty disguised as a wedding. You cheer politely, wondering how long the calm will last. Henry doesn't trust easily. You watch as he carefully rebuilds the monarchy like a man repairing a cracked vase. Slowly, one deliberate touch at a time, he taxes with care, controls the nobles with a mixture of favors and fear, and invents something called the council, learned in the law, which you quickly learn to avoid unless you enjoy heavy fines and suspicious audits. And yet, England is stabilizing, slowly, awkwardly, but it is. You watch the crown's finances get cleaned up with almost surgical precision. Henry is a hoarder of coins, and by the end of his reign, the royal treasury bulges like a smug piggy bank. He creates the Yeoman of the Guard, a royal bodyguard that still exists today, and dabbles in early international diplomacy. Spain, France, Scotland, he makes peace where he can, marries off his children like chess pieces, and generally avoids the battlefield like it's covered in contagious nonsense. Quirky side note, Henry VII was obsessed with appearance. He kept an army of tailors and jewelers busy, projecting opulence even while pinching pennies behind the scenes. His private chambers, however, were notoriously plain. Historians still argue whether his frugality bordered on paranoia or just came from a lifetime of hiding in exile with empty pockets. There's one big problem, though: pretenders. Oh, so many pretenders. First up, Lambert Simnel, a boy trained to impersonate the Earl of Warwick, a real royal cousin locked up in the Tower. You peer through the crowds in 1487 as the boy is crowned Edward VI in Dublin and shipped off with an army of mercenaries. Henry, cool as ever, defeats the rebellion at the Battle of Stokefield and, shockingly, spares the kid. He gives him a job in the royal kitchens, yes, really. From fake king to real spit-turner. Next comes Perkin Warbeck, another smooth-talking claimant who says he's Richard, Duke of York, one of the infamous princes in the Tower. He gets backing from Margaret of Burgundy, James IV of Scotland, and even charms the Habsburgs. You cringe as he parades around European courts, styling himself the rightful King of England. Henry, unimpressed, eventually captures him and keeps him under increasingly stricter hospitality before finally executing him in 1499. You notice something strange through all this. Henry doesn't get rattled. He always plays the long game, whether it's through treaties or taxes or tedious paperwork. He's not a romantic warrior king. He's a spreadsheet in human form. And in this new, post-Civil War England, that's exactly what you need. Strengthens the navy, barely, but still, and lays the groundwork for later expansion. He sends John Cabot off to discover new trade routes, and while Cabot's exact landfall is debated, his voyage hints at the growing appetite for overseas exploration. You squint at the map and wonder, what's west of Ireland anyway? Henry also dotes cautiously on his eldest son, Arthur. You watch a grand wedding in 1501 as Arthur marries Catherine of Aragon, daughter of the mighty Catholic monarchs of Spain. It's a diplomatic jackpot, but tragedy strikes fast. In 1502, Arthur dies unexpectedly at just 15, and you feel the air shift. Suddenly, all of Henry's carefully laid plans rest on his second son, young, athletic, not very studious Henry. You already know where that's going, don't you? But for now, in the last years of Henry VII's life, England is calm, controlled, clenched. The man who founded the Tudor dynasty never truly relaxes. He's suspicious, often cold, and trusts few. His health declines, and in 1509, he dies, in Richmond Palace, leaving behind a throne solidly planted, but a son eager to rip up the rulebook. You exhale. Peace, yes. But the storm's coming. You don't so much step into Henry VIII's reign as get launched into it by cannon fire and choral music. The moment young Henry takes the crown in 1509, it's clear the era of quiet accounting is over. You're in the middle of a court that feels more like a costume party, thrown by a competitive bodybuilder with a thing for Latin mottos and velvet capes. The kid is dazzling, tall, athletic, fluent in several languages, with calves that get entire sonnets written about them. People actually cheer when he becomes king. You blink. Is this hope? Henry is the opposite of his father in nearly every way. Extroverted, risk-happy, and deeply committed to having a good time, while still expecting everyone to bow properly. You glance around the palace and spot a young Catherine of Aragon, widow of Henry's older brother and now queen. It seems sweet at first. They appear in public holding hands. People whisper about love, but you've been here long enough to know, when royalty gets romantic, storm clouds usually follow. Still, at first, things hum along. Henry's court is a Renaissance playground. Music, art, tournaments, masks. You sip mulled wine and watch the king joust in golden armor like he's auditioning to be a myth. And he's not just a party prince, he's smart, writes books, debates theology. He even earns the title Defender of the Faith from the Pope. You'll want to savor that irony because things are about to get very awkward between Henry and Rome. Here's your mainstream historical moment. Henry VIII breaks from the Catholic Church to form the Church of England. But the real tea is why. Catherine, despite years of trying, hasn't produced a male heir. Henry convinces himself their marriage is cursed, something about her being his brother's widow and Old Testament law. He asks the Pope for an annulment. The Pope, under pressure from Catherine's powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor, stalls. Henry grows impatient. You hear the whispers first. A new woman at court, Anne Boleyn. Sharp eyes, clever tongue, French flair. Henry is obsessed. You shift uneasily. This isn't just infatuation, it's political, theological, explosive. Henry starts insisting he, not the Pope, should be the supreme authority in his realm. You blink, and suddenly monasteries are being dismantled, monks evicted, and gold funneled into royal coffers. The dissolution of the monasteries hits hard. You walk through abbeys turned into rubble, once sacred spaces echoing with silence and profit. Historians still argue whether this was religious zeal, economic greed, or personal vendetta. But for the first time, you realize the church and the crown can't share power anymore. Anne Boleyn becomes queen, but the fairy tale turns grim fast. She gives birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. Henry is disappointed. Anne suffers miscarriages. The court sours. Soon she's accused of adultery, incest, treason. Pick your poison. Whether the charges are true or just a well-dressed excuse, you watch in muted horror as Anne is executed at the Tower. You flinch at the sharpness of it all. Then comes Jane Seymour, wife number 3. She gives Henry the son he's longed for, Edward. Henry is briefly satisfied. Jane dies shortly after childbirth. He mourns sincerely. You get the sense that for a moment the king remembers what grief feels like, but only for a moment. The marriages keep coming like a grim reality show. Anne of Cleves is chosen from a portrait. Henry meets her in person and declares she looks nothing like the painting. The marriage is annulled. You cringe for both of them. At least she gets a generous pension and manages to avoid beheading, so success?
Next is Catherine Howard, barely a teenager when she marries the now aging and suspicious king. She's accused of infidelity, and this time you don't even want to look. Another queen sent to the scaffold. The last wife is Catherine Parr.
Calm, clever woman who outlives Henry by outmaneuvering his moods. She survives, which at this point feels like the ultimate accomplishment. Quirky tidbit. Henry had a traveling court that moved constantly because, well, Tudor hygiene wasn't great, and the smell could get unmanageable. So you find yourself packing and repacking your trunk as you follow this royal caravan of banquets, bad decisions, and ever-thinning patience. Physically, the king transforms too. Gone are the jousts. You now see him hoisted onto his horse with a mechanical lift. His legs are ulcerated, his waistline ballooning, and yet no one dares say a word. He's still the center of gravity. Everything spins around his moods. And here's the thing, he isn't just a tyrant. He's complex, capable of generosity and cruelty in the same breath. He funds schools, promotes humanist scholars, writes music, but he also burns heretics, imprisons friends, and reshapes the religious map of England forever. By the time Henry VIII dies in 1547, you're exhausted. 6 marriages, 1 son, 2 daughters, countless executions, and a kingdom changed beyond recognition. But he leaves behind a rare thing for an English monarch: a male heir, a strong throne, and daughters whose stories are far from over. You step quietly out of the shadow of a king who loved deeply, ruled absolutely, and broke everything to build something he thought would last. He didn't just reign, he redefined what a king could be, and the realm, whether it liked it or not, had to keep up. You barely have time to catch your breath before the next monarch is carried in, literally. Edward VI, Henry VIII's long-awaited son, is only 9 years old when he inherits the crown. You're now in the strange twilight of Tudor ambition, where child kings sit on thrones too big for their legs and the grown-ups behind them scramble for power like cats in a bag. You shuffle through palaces that feel more like political minefields. Edward may be the king, but the real action happens behind embroidered curtains. First up is Edward's uncle, Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, who acts as Lord Protector. The name sounds cozy like a security blanket, but you quickly realize it's more like CEO of England with a teenager as the brand logo. Somerset kicks off an ambitious Protestant reform agenda. Mass is now in English, priests can marry, and elaborate Catholic rituals are out. You kneel on a newly planed stone floor and look around. No incense, no Latin, no gold leaf halos glaring down at you. The soul of England is being repainted in grays and scripture. You get the sense that, despite his age, Edward is all in on this. He writes theological essays for fun and dreams of a kingdom steeped in pure Protestant truth. But the country is less enthusiastic. You smell smoke rising from prayer books being torched and see angry peasants clashing with soldiers. The prayer book rebellion in the West Country and Kett's rebellion in Norfolk are less about theology and more about poverty, enclosure, and a general sense of, hey, things were supposed to get better, not worse. Historians still argue whether Somerset was a reformer with poor political instincts or a reformer sabotaged by enemies. Either way, he falls hard. In comes John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, who doesn't even pretend to be anyone's uncle. He takes the wheel with corporate efficiency and starts planning a future without the boy king. Because Edward, for all his bright eyes and big ideas, is sick. Very sick. You watch the boy shrink while courtiers whisper about succession like it's a chess game and they're playing with live explosives. The logical heir is Edward's older half-sister Mary, but she's a Catholic. That's a no-go for a Protestant court trying to lock in the Reformation. So what do? They reach for a legal loophole. Edward is convinced, maybe by Dudley, maybe on his own, to write a devise for succession, skipping over Mary and Elizabeth and naming his cousin Lady Jane Grey as heir. Jane is young, devoutly Protestant, and, here's the catch, married to Dudley's son. You can practically hear the Jenga tower wobbling. Edward dies in 1553, and Lady Jane is declared queen. You barely have time to find her on the royal family tree before she's locked in the tower. Her reign lasts 9 days. 9. You've had colds that lasted longer. Mary marches in with popular support and not much patience, and so begins the reign of Mary Thrugar, Henry's eldest daughter by Catherine of Aragon. You feel the gears grind in reverse.
Mary brings England back under the Catholic Church, and you start seeing altars restored, Latin masses revived, and Protestant preachers dragged off in chains. She's not just restoring religion, she's avenging her mother, correcting a country
she sees as lost. But here's where things go full firestorm. Her persecution of Protestants earns her the nickname Bloody Mary, and you can't ignore the smoke. Over 280 people are burned at the stake, including prominent bishops. You stand in the crowd at Smithfield, the heat too close, the prayers loud, the air thick with ash and doubt. And yet, it's more complicated than that. Mary truly believes she's saving souls, not roasting heretics. She sees herself as a servant of God, not a tyrant. But belief doesn't soften the flames, and her legacy hardens in the public mind like scorched earth. She also marries Philip II of Spain, a move that goes over about as well as boiled cabbage at a birthday party. England grumbles about foreign influence and uneasy alliances. Worse, the marriage produces no heir. You sense Mary's desperation in every procession, every pilgrimage, every whispered prayer for a child. It never comes. She suffers phantom pregnancies, cruel twists of hope and biology. Quirky fact, Mary was the first queen regnant of England to rule in her own right, not through a husband or son. For all the tragedies of her reign, she cracked open the door for women to hold the crown with authority. She walked through fire, and though history rarely paints her kindly, you can't say she ruled small. She dies in 1558, lonely and disappointed, having failed to turn back the tide of Protestantism or produce a Catholic heir. The throne passes to her half-sister Elizabeth, who's been waiting in the political shadows, watching everyone else burn out, sometimes literally. And just like that, the stage clears for a queen who will reign for 45 years, never marry, dodge assassination plots like she's in a spy novel, and turn England into a cultural supernova. But don't leap ahead yet. You pause, one hand still warm from the fires of Mary's England, the other reaching into the golden glow on the horizon. This isn't just a changing of the crown. It's a transformation of the country's very soul. You find yourself blinking in a haze of incense and ambition as Elizabeth I ascends the throne in 1558. The air feels cleaner already, or maybe it's just the sudden lack of burnings and bad marriages. At 25, the new queen is sharp as a dagger, dressed in pearls and poise, and already plotting how to keep her head when everyone else seems so fond of losing theirs. She's the daughter of Anne Boleyn, the executed queen, and Henry VIII, the king who split an entire church to get a son but ended up with this. A red-headed, highly educated woman with the ability to turn court gossip into policy and poetry into propaganda. You watch her first move, a delicate dance. She doesn't immediately purge Catholics, nor does she become the Protestant hammer her advisors might want. Instead, she crafts a middle way, Anglicanism, blending Catholic pageantry with Protestant theology. It's a bit like ordering a sandwich that offends everyone but poisons no one. And it works. Mostly. The Elizabethan religious settlement becomes the cornerstone of her reign. You walk past churches where Latin chants have been swapped for English, psalms, but stained glass windows still glow in the afternoon sun. It's not peace exactly, but it's functional. You'll take it. The new queen knows how fragile her position is. She's unmarried, childless, and technically illegitimate in the eyes of Catholic Europe. You see the world's monarchs leaning in like chess players. Spain eyes her nervously. France wonders if she'll marry into their line. Scotland clutches Mary, Queen of Scots, like a royal wild card, but Elizabeth's not folding. She makes a choice, one that will define her forever. She won't marry, or at least she won't marry anyone. Instead, she becomes the Virgin Queen, married to England itself. You hear it in her speeches, in her carefully crafted iconography. Elizabeth as Gloriana, Astria, the warrior maiden surrounded by virtue and wisdom. That doesn't stop the suitors. Oh, there are suitors. Dozens. Some genuinely in love, some political pawns, and at least one who probably just wanted the crown jewels. Elizabeth flirts, promises, and dodges them all with the grace of a matador in pearls. You watch her play favorites, most famously with Robert Dudley, the dashing Earl of Leicester. The court whispers. Some say they share more than moonlit walks. Others insist she never let any man too close. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth was truly celibate or simply brilliant at looking untouchable. Then there's Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin and living Catholic symbol of what might have been. You track Mary's rise and fall like a tragic opera. She marries badly, loses her throne, flees to England, and becomes a royal prisoner. For nearly 2 decades, Elizabeth keeps her under lock and key, unsure whether to protect her, use her, or get rid of her. Eventually, a plot, possibly real, possibly staged, gives Elizabeth the excuse she needs. Mary is executed in 1587, and you feel the weight of it settle like fog. One queen kills another, and the age of innocence ends with a single swing. But don't worry, you've still got pirates. Well, privateers, technically. Government-sanctioned plunderers like Sir Francis Drake, who sails around the globe stealing Spanish gold and annoying everyone in Madrid. You sip ale on the dock as English ships come home loaded with treasures and stories. Empire is starting to sparkle on the horizon, even if Elizabeth herself pretends not to notice. Then comes the biggest threat of all, the Spanish Armada in Tinderandijk 1388. You stand with the Queen at Tilbury, where she rides among her troops in armor, delivering a speech that makes even hardened soldiers cry a little. You have to admit, the woman has flair. I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, she says, but I have the heart and stomach of a king. Boom. Mic drop. The Armada is scattered by cannon fire and storms. Some call it divine wind, others just poor planning. Either way, England survives. You sleep a little easier under the crackling glow of bonfires lit to celebrate the victory. Elizabeth is no longer a cautious young queen. She is a legend. And it's not just politics and war. You're living through a cultural explosion. Shakespeare, Marlowe, Spencer. Theater blossoms, poetry sings, and suddenly even your shoemaker is quoting sonnets. You catch a performance of Hamlet at the Globe and feel the language wrap around your ears like silken thunder. Art doesn't just survive under Elizabeth. It thrives. Quirky fact. Elizabeth used cosmetics made of lead and vinegar to maintain her ghostly white complexion. It looked regal but slowly poisoned her. You watch her age behind those painted masks, her teeth blackening, her wigs multiplying. Even Gloriana isn't immune to time. Her later years are harder. Trusted advisors die. Dudley, Walsingham, Essex, her once favorite who leads a rebellion and is executed. You watch her retreat into solitude, pacing the palace halls like a memory. By the time Elizabeth dies in 1603, she has ruled for 45 years. No husband, no heir, just a legacy so immense it echoes like bells across the ages. She leaves behind a Protestant England, a sense of national pride, and a legend that only deepens with every retelling. You close your eyes and imagine her final hours, surrounded by silence and shadows, wearing pearls and powder, still every inch the queen. She ruled alone, and she ruled well. And now, as the last Tudor breathes her last, you turn toward a new dynasty, waiting in the wings. Scotland approaches, and with it, a king who will unite crowns, believe in witches, and nearly get blown sky high. You wake to the steady rumble of hooves and a crown rolling down from the highlands. The Tudor line is done, and into its shadow steps James VI of Scotland, now James IV of England. One man, two kingdoms. You watch as he crosses the border in 1603 to inherit a throne he never expected to hold. His journey a literal crowning moment in the birth of a new royal dynasty. The Stuarts. You shuffle into place at court, uncertain. James isn't glamorous, like Elizabeth. He doesn't wear dazzling gowns or deliver speeches that echo through the centuries. Instead, he lectures, a lot, about divine right, witchcraft, and why Parliament needs to stop asking so many questions. You stifle a yawn as he rambles on about the theology of monarchy, but then, bam, he names the era after himself. You are now officially living in the Jacobean age. Branding? Nailed it. Let's back up. James is the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, the cousin Elizabeth executed. Ironic, right? Her death clears the way for her son to become king. He's been ruling Scotland since he was a toddler, which means he arrives with experience, a love of order, and a pretty open disdain for anyone who thinks monarchs should have limits. That divine right thing, he's not just into it, he is. James tries to unite England and Scotland into a single country. Great Britain, he calls it, but nobody else seems that keen. Parliament blocks it. Maps still draw a border. You sigh and keep writing England, mostly, on your letters. Religious tension? Still alive and well. The country may be Protestant, but Catholics haven't exactly disappeared, and some are very much not vibing with King James. Enter the gunpowder plot of 1605. You huddle beneath the Houses of Parliament as Guy Fawkes and his co-conspirators stuff barrels of gunpowder into the cellar. Their goal? Blow up the king, his ministers, and Parliament all in one go. A real reboot the realm kind of move. They fail, of course, thanks to a tip-off letter, some sniffing guards, and bad timing. Fawkes is caught, tortured, and hanged. You don't sleep for days. But then the government starts throwing fireworks every November 5th, and suddenly you're eating roast chestnuts and lighting bonfires in honor of not being exploded. Go figure. James also commissions a new translation of the Bible, the King James Version. You sit in the pew and listen as ancient words tumble out in thunderous English. In the beginning was the Word. It's poetry. It's scripture. It's the greatest publishing success of the century. Even if you're not religious, you'll find yourself quoting it for the rest of your life. But it's not all theology and treason. The court of James I is a little weird. You see poets, playwrights, philosophers, and flat-out sycophants all jockeying for favor. James has favorites. Most famously, George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham. The closeness between them sparks gossip, letters full of kissy metaphors, and centuries of speculation. Historians still argue whether their relationship was romantic or just very, very affectionate. Either way, it makes people twitchy. You slip into the theater to escape the courtly weirdness, and oh, what a time to do it. Shakespeare is still writing. His later plays, Macbeth, The Tempest, King Lear, mirror the dark complexity of the new reign. You sit beneath a thatched roof, stunned into silence by a mad king dividing his kingdom or three witches cackling over a boiling cauldron. Fun fact, Shakespeare wrote Macbeth specifically to flatter James, who was obsessed with witches and traced his ancestry to Banquo. Never underestimate the power of a personalized play. James isn't all bad. He ends the long and costly war with Spain keeps the country mostly at peace and truly tries to balance the competing demands of a rapidly changing England. But his money management? Yikes. You watch as his lavish court burns through cash faster than it can be taxed, and Parliament grows increasingly salty about footing the bill. By the end of his reign, the glow has dimmed. The kingdom is fraying at the seams. Parliament is more defiant. Religious divides are deepening. And James, he's tired. He dies in 1625, passing the crown to his son Charles. who looks the part but hasn't really been paying attention in monarch school. Quirky tidbit, James believed tobacco was a loathsome custom. He even wrote a pamphlet against it. Meanwhile, half his court is puffing like chimney stacks. You cough politely and move along, and so you watch the torch pass from the philosopher king to a monarch with even stronger ideas about divine right, and even less patience for compromise. James thought ruling England was like shepherding goats. Charles will find out it's more like juggling snakes, while Parliament sharpens its knives. The next chapter won't be about courtly masks and Bible verses. It will be about power, pride, and a kingdom spiraling toward the unthinkable, war against itself. You sit on the edge of a stiff velvet cushion as Charles I takes the throne in 1625, chin high, hair perfectly curled, and absolutely convinced he was chosen by God to rule you, all of you, without questions, without compromise, and certainly without Parliament messing up his divine vibe. You squint. Something feels off. He's regal, sure, but not warm. Where Elizabeth charmed and James lectured, Charles just decrees. You glance at his French Catholic queen, Henrietta Maria, and the Protestant court starts shifting uncomfortably. A Catholic queen in post-gunpowder England, that's like bringing a tinderbox to a candle shop. Charles begins his reign with tension baked into every interaction. He dissolves Parliament not once, not twice, but multiple times in a slow, painful power tug-of-war. He thinks divine right means right now. Parliament thinks otherwise. So he goes full autocrat, raising taxes without approval, inventing forced loans, and even charging people for not being knighted. It's called ship money, and you grumble as you pay it, even though you're nowhere near a coastline. By 1629, Charles says, "You know what? No more Parliament." And just like that, he enters the era known as the personal rule, or as his critics call it, the 11 years tyranny. During this time, he rules solo, relying heavily on his advisors, especially the deeply unpopular Archbishop Laud and the scheming Earl of Strafford. You watch the kingdom simmer with silent rage, especially when Laud starts enforcing strict religious conformity, making Anglicanism look suspiciously Catholic again. People whisper. Puritans glare. Scotland, where Laud tries to impose the English prayer book, practically riots. In 1637, you witness the bishops' wars, when Charles tries to tame the Scots and ends up provoking full-blown resistance. He needs money to fight the rebellion, but oh right, he burned his bridge with Parliament. So reluctantly, Charles calls them back in 1640. You're there for the short Parliament, 3 weeks long, zero productivity, mostly yelling. He disbands it again. Then desperation wins out. He summons the long Parliament, hoping for cash. Instead, Parliament bites back hard. Strafford, executed. Laud, imprisoned. Ship money, abolished. You feel the air crackle. This isn't a tug-of-war anymore. It's a fuse burning towards something much darker. Tensions boil over in 1642, after a botched attempt to arrest 5 MPs inside Parliament. Yes, he literally walks in with soldiers. Charles flees London. You watch nobles pick sides. Royalists, Cavaliers, versus parliamentarians, Roundheads. The English Civil War begins, and suddenly your country is at war with itself. You trudge across muddy fields, past makeshift camps and printing presses churning out propaganda. Brothers fight brothers. Whole towns divide. Charles has better horsemen, flashier banners. Parliament has grit, and a man named Oliver Cromwell. At first a minor MP with a stern mustache, Cromwell rises quickly, commanding the disciplined new model army. You're there at the Battle of Naseby in 1645, where Charles's forces crumble and the tide turns. Captured, escaped, recaptured. Charles drags things out like a royal soap opera. He even tries to restart war with the help of the Scots. You watch Parliament lose patience. After years of bloodshed, they make a decision no English monarch has faced before. Trial. In public. You're in the crowd at Westminster Hall in 1649, struggling to grasp it. The King of England, God's anointed, is being tried for treason against his own people. The charges, tyranny, betrayal, and bloodshed. Charles remains calm, regal, refuses to recognize the court. But it's done. On January 30th, 1649, you stand in silence as Charles Thorne walks onto the scaffold outside the banqueting house, bundled against the cold, wearing 2 shirts so he won't shiver and look afraid. He gives a final speech, lays his head on the block, and with one sharp thud, England changes forever. The monarchy is over. Quirky fact, The executioner wore a mask and was paid handsomely, but his identity remains a mystery. To this day, historians still argue whether it was Richard Brandon, AEO, known hangman, or someone entirely different. Now the crown is gone and you're left blinking at something no one saw coming. A kingless England. A republic. The Commonwealth of England, led not by a monarch but by Parliament, and very quickly by Oliver Cromwell. Spoiler alert, republic doesn't mean relaxation. You brace yourself as Cromwell steps forward, not with a crown, but with authority as Lord Protector. He promises godly government, discipline, and national healing. What he delivers is more: Puritan boot camp, dancing, band, theaters, closed, Christmas, canceled. Yes, that Christmas. You sip your sad, non-festive ale and try not to hum carols. But that's the next chapter. For now, you stand amid the stunned silence of a decapitated monarchy. A crown lies buried, not in a tomb, but in a vault under military boots and printed pamphlets. What comes next isn't peace. It's rule by sword and scripture. You wake up to the uncomfortable quiet of a kingdom with no king. No royal proclamations, no lavish ceremonies. Just Parliament, Oliver Cromwell, and an entire population blinking into the gray light of a political experiment nobody really asked for. Welcome to the English Commonwealth, where monarchy is out, godliness is in, and parties, well, they're pretty much illegal now. At first, you're hopeful. Parliament declares England a republic in 1649, promising liberty, reform, and national healing. But things get weird fast. The rump Parliament, the leftover MPs who didn't get kicked out or beheaded, start acting like maybe they are the new royalty. They pass laws, yes, but also seem to argue more than they govern. You sit through their debates, wondering if this is what democracy's supposed to look like. Dusty, cranky men yelling about taxes and theology. Then Cromwell gets fed up. In 1653, he bursts into Parliament with soldiers, points dramatically at the Speaker's chair and says something like, "You have sat too long for any good you have done lately. In the name of God, go." You whisper, "Yikes," and shuffle back out the door. Parliament's dissolved. Again. What replaces it is no less autocratic than the monarchy, just with different branding. Now Cromwell rules as Lord Protector. It's not a king, technically, but it smells suspiciously like one. There's no crown, but there's a state seal. There's no royal court, but there's a big house with guards. And Cromwell? He signs letters like a monarch, appoints himself boss of everything, and makes his son heir apparent. You start muttering, same hat, different head. This is the Protectorate, and it's bleak if you enjoy fun. Cromwell, a devout Puritan, has a very specific idea of what a godly nation looks. Like theaters, closed, maypoles, cut down, alehouses, regulated within an inch of their lives. You try to sneak a jig at your cousin's wedding and end up fined for frivolity. Even Christmas is stripped of its tinsel and joy. Just another workday now, thank you very much. You chew your cold meat pie and miss Charles's fashionably irresponsible parties. But it's not all gloom. Cromwell reorganizes the army, crushes crime in the countryside, and, in some ways, stabilizes a fractured nation. He even tries to tolerate Jews again, lifting their centuries-old ban from England. A bold move, considering how anti-Semitic most of Europe still is. You wander the streets of London and hear foreign tongues return to the markets. Hebrew, Dutch, Spanish. The city begins to breathe again. Quirky tidbit, Cromwell reportedly loved music, just not dancing to it. So military bands are fine, but don't you dare tap your foot. Also, he was reportedly terrified of being buried alive. Historians still argue whether his elaborate funeral arrangements were just pomp or a practical, please make sure I'm actually dead plan. Overseas, Cromwell means business. Ireland, he invades with ruthless efficiency in 1649, and the massacre at Drogheda still echoes through history as one of the bloodiest moments of English expansion. Scotland, defeated. The Caribbean, seized from Spain in a bold colonial gamble. You may not like him, but you can't say he isn't effective. Still, the tension never really fades. Cromwell's government feels temporary, propped up by pikes and prayer. The moment he dies in 1658, you get this sinking feeling, like someone's yanked the keystone from a very fragile arch. Sure enough, things fall apart. His son, Richard Cromwell, nicknamed Tumbledown Dick, tries to take over. He lasts about 9 months. Turns out running a country isn't as easy as inheriting it. You watch the military grow restless, Parliament fumble its power plays, and the people start whispering again about kings, real ones, with robes and rings and fewer sermons. In 1660, the monarchy comes full circle. Parliament, desperate for stability, sends out an invitation to Charles II, son of the executed king who's been chilling in France. Come back, they say, and maybe just promise not to be a tyrant? Charles agrees. The restoration begins, and as he steps off the boat, people cheer, bells ring, and ale flows like a river. You, exhausted and ready for some kind of normal, quietly rejoice. So here you are, monarchy restored, heads still attached, and a generation older. England's brief flirtation with republics, military rule, and moral purity has ended not with fireworks, but with a quiet sigh of relief and a coronation. But don't get too comfortable. This new king? He's charming, yes. But beneath the velvet lies a man who remembers exile, revenge, and a whole lot of unfinished business. You wake up to the scent of damp London air and the unmistakable rustle of powdered wigs. It's 1685, and James II has just taken the throne. A Catholic king in a Protestant country. You stretch, blink, and immediately regret not staying under the covers, because you're about to witness one of the messiest, most misunderstood royal crashes in British history. James isn't exactly subtle. He's more of a smash through the window than knock on the door kind of monarch. Within months, he's handing out top jobs to fellow Catholics like free samples at a village fair, ignoring laws that say he shouldn't, and alienating the exact people he needs on his side. The mood shifts faster than a British summer. Sunny one moment, full-blown storm the next. The Protestants? They're jittery. Parliament? Bristling. You? Probably regretting not booking a vacation to 17th century Amsterdam. Now, James does have one decent move in his pocket. He promises religious toleration. Radical? Sure. But instead of warming hearts, it lights fires. His declaration of indulgence suspends laws against Catholics and dissenters. Sounds kind on paper, but the way he rams it through, by royal prerogative, ignoring Parliament entirely, has people whispering tyrant into their pewter tankards. Then, like an episode twist nobody asked for, a baby is born. A healthy, suspiciously well-timed Catholic baby boy, James Francis Edward Stuart. And boom, suddenly there's not just one Catholic monarch to worry about, but an entire potential dynasty. Rumors fly. Was the baby snuck into the birthing chamber in a warming pan? Some still believe it. Even today, historians argue whether the conspiracy theory had any traction outside panicked Protestant circles, or whether it was pure political theater with excellent stagecraft. But what really undoes James isn't the baby, it's his knack for ignoring every single red flag. He arrests bishops for refusing to read his indulgence aloud in churches. 7 of them. 7. At once. It's like arresting the Spice Girls of the Anglican Church. The public goes bananas, cheering the bishops when they're acquitted. James, somehow, is shocked. You clutch your cloak tighter as things unravel. Enter William of Orange, Protestant Dutch, married to James's Protestant daughter Mary. Basically, the in-law from constitutional heaven. The English political elite, terrified James will become Catholic Voldemort, write William an invite. Come sort this out, they plead. And William, he's more than happy to oblige. In 1688, William lands with a modest army on England's southern coast. No burning cities, no thunderous sieges, just a very awkward royal family drama playing out across muddy fields. James sends troops. Some defect. More awkward. His daughter Anne sneaks out in disguise and joins William. Ouch. Eventually, James, deserted and dejected, flees. He tries once, gets caught. Tries again, and this time it works. He drops the royal seal in the Thames like a mike and sails off to France. It's the only time in English history a king is overthrown without a single battlefield clash. They call it the Glorious Revolution, because bloodless coups apparently get better PR. Back in London, everyone sort of panics, then cobbles together a new monarchy like a last-minute science project. William and Mary are crowned as co-monarchs at first, and Parliament makes them sign the Bill of Rights. It's a royal instruction manual, no suspending laws, no taxation without consent, no standing armies in peacetime, and no Catholic monarchs, ever again. Sorry, future Jameses. It's not a total democracy, of course. You still don't get a say, unless you own land and have the right anatomy. But still, the throne is now firmly tethered to Parliament's leash, the divine right of Kings gently boxed up and tossed into historical storage. Now here's the quirky bit you almost miss. James doesn't give up. From his French exile, he plots. He lands in Ireland in 1689 trying to launch a Catholic comeback. You duck as the Battle of the Boyne erupts, cannon fire, horse charges, and the sound of James losing. Again. William wins and James runs. Again. Honestly, the man should invest in better getaway shoes. Historians still debate whether James was truly aiming for absolute rule or just a tone-deaf monarch out of step with his people. Was he a tragic figure clinging to personal faith, or a would-be autocrat undone by arrogance? The answer, like most things in history, probably sits somewhere in between. What's undeniable is the impact. The monarchy, once untouchable, now walks on constitutional eggshells. Parliament, it smells blood and power. The people, slightly dizzy from regime change, but not mad about it. And you? You're snuggled into your candlelit corner watching the modern British state start to form, one awkward abdication at a time. You're still brushing the metaphorical dust off your coat from James II's hasty exit when William and Mary take the throne. The vibe is cautious optimism, like when someone hands you a new phone with duct tape on it and says, "It works, mostly." Welcome to the co-reign of William III and Mary II, where everything is technically fine, but no one can quite exhale. Parliament, having just strong-armed a king into retirement, is feeling itself, so it drafts the Bill of Rights. Not the American one, mind you, but the blueprint for every constitutional monarchy that comes after. You read through the clauses and realize this is less about freedom and more about telling monarchs. You are officially on probation. William and Mary agree to the terms, partly because they want the job, partly because they don't want the pitchforks. They're crowned together, but the power dynamic isn't exactly 50-50. William has the military clout and the political instincts, while Mary, well, she's popular, devout, and tragically stuck in the middle between her country and her dad. Now, let's be real. Sharing the throne is as awkward as a three-legged race in wet socks. They try their best, but when Mary dies of smallpox in 1694, William rules alone. The public doesn't exactly cheer. He's Dutch, distant, and emotionally unavailable. Basically the 17th century equivalent of dating someone who never texts back. But William's got bigger problems. Remember James II? Still not over the whole dethroning thing. And neither are his supporters, the Jacobites. These folks believe the crown should follow the hereditary line, regardless of parliaments. Panic attacks. They cause endless headaches, especially in Scotland and Ireland, where loyalties run deep and grudges are practically heirlooms. You tiptoe through the political minefield. Jacobite uprisings flare, but William holds the line, bolstered by his alliances and the sheer fact that nobody wants James back, bad enough to endure another civil war. Still, William's reign isn't cozy. He's nearly killed in a sleigh crash, lives in near constant war with France, and has the charisma of a slightly damp biscuit. Then, there's the legacy move, the Act of Settlement in 1701. Parliament, terrified that another Catholic could sneak onto the throne, essentially bans it forever. From now on, no Catholic, and no one married to a Catholic, can sit on the English throne. It's harsh, it's discriminatory. It's also the only way they can keep the monarchy on a constitutional leash without it galloping off into papal politics again. The act names Sophia of Hanover, a distant Protestant relative, as heir if William dies childless, which, spoiler, he does. No kids, just war injuries and sad horses. But first you witness one more monarch. Enter Queen Anne, the younger sister of Mary and last of the Stuarts. Her reign starts in 1702, and while it might look peaceful at first glance, it's more like a duck, paddling furiously under the water. Anne is devout, emotionally fragile, and plagued by tragedy. 17 pregnancies, not one surviving child. 17. That number sticks with you, heavy and painful. Every hope for a Tudor-style dynasty slips quietly through her fingers. But Anne isn't just sobbing into a lace handkerchief. Under her reign, one of the most important national projects takes shape. The Act of Union in 1707. England and Scotland formally merge into the Kingdom of Great Britain. One crown, one parliament, one deeply skeptical joint nation trying to figure out how to live together without stabbing each other. The negotiations are brutal, filled with bribes, threats, and some deeply unromantic marriage metaphors. Many Scots are furious. Some English aren't thrilled either. But economically it makes sense, and politically it closes the door on more French-backed Jacobite nonsense. You might say it's a marriage of convenience sealed by mutual exhaustion. Anne, meanwhile, surrounds herself with strong female friends, most famously Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough. Their friendship burns bright, then disintegrates, in scandal, gossip, and hurt feelings. Historians still debate the depth of that relationship. Was it merely political, deeply emotional, borderline romantic? You'll never know, and neither will they. Still, Anne's reign sees the rise of the two-party system, the Tories and the Whigs. You watch as politics gets more recognizable, still messy, still elite-heavy, but definitely inching towards something more modern. Think, powdered Whigs yelling at each other with slightly more structure. The War of the Spanish Succession rages through much of her reign, as Britain tries to block France from stacking thrones like a power-hungry Jenga player. Military victories, particularly under the Duke of Marlborough, yes, Sarah's husband, give Anne's reign an air of triumph. But back home, her health is failing, her ministers are backstabbing each other, and succession looms like a storm cloud. Because, say, it with me, Anne has no heir. And under the Act of Settlement, the next Protestant in line is Sophia of Hanover, who inconveniently dies just before Anne, so the crown skips to Sophia's son, George III, who doesn't speak English, or want the job, but rules anyway. You fade out on Queen Anne in her final days, bloated, grieving, alone in a palace that feels more mausoleum than monarchy, the last Stuart slipping into history with no one to carry her name. But she leaves behind a country more unified than ever before, and a monarchy that's now more stage manager than star. You blink into the brisk, orderly dawn of the 18th century, where carriages clatter on cobblestones, and everything smells faintly of snuff and compromise. The monarchy is now a legally leashed lion, pacing behind constitutional bars, and into this carefully arranged zoo wanders a German guy named George I, Elector of Hanover, shows up in 1714 to claim the throne of Great Britain like a man who's won a raffle he didn't enter. He speaks no English. Seriously, not a word. His court speaks German. His jokes don't land, his accent is thick enough to slice. But thanks to the Act of Settlement and a complete lack of Protestant alternatives, he gets the crown anyway. UE. Watch him get off the boat with all the grace of someone deeply uninterested in ruling a country he's never lived in. The British aren't thrilled. The Scots grumble. The Tories sulk. But Parliament? Oh, they're loving this. A king who can't argue back is frankly the best kind of king. So begins the Hanoverian dynasty, a line of imported royals who treat the throne less like a destiny and more like an awkward family obligation. George III barely tries to engage. He visits Hanover regularly, leaves governance to ministers, and starts the real shift from monarchical power to parliamentary primacy. And you find a comfy seat in the gallery, because British politics is about to become its own soap opera. Enter Robert Walpole, often called Britain's first prime minister, though the title's unofficial. He smooth talks his way into power, balancing the king's indifference with Parliament's ambition. You sip tea and watch as Walpole juggles scandal, war, and Whig-Tory drama like a Georgian-era political circus act. Now, not everyone's content. With the new king, the Jacobites strike again, hoping to place James II's son, the Old Pretender, on the throne. The 1715 rebellion kicks off in Scotland. You brace yourself for chaos, but the whole thing fizzles like a damp firework. Poor coordination, bad timing, and zero widespread support. You'd almost feel bad if they weren't trying to undo the entire constitutional system. George IV survives. The challenge, but not the public's love. When he dies in 1727 on yet another trip back to Hanover, there's a sigh of national indifference. And waiting in the wings is his son, George II, who at least speaks a little English and is slightly more interested in ruling. George II's reign is like the middle season of a long-running show. Solid, serviceable, but no breakout star moments. He clashes with Walpole, flirts with the idea of leadership, then remembers he'd rather let ministers handle the boring stuff. One odd highlight: he's the last British monarch to lead troops in battle at Dettingen in 1743. You can almost picture him in powdered wig and breastplate, awkwardly galloping across a muddy field like someone late to a masquerade. But the Jacobites, they're not done. In 1745, James's son, Bonnie Prince Charlie, the young pretender, launches another rebellion. This one comes terrifyingly close. The 45 rebellion sweeps down from Scotland like a plaid tsunami. For a while, it looks like they might actually pull it off. Then comes Culloden, the last pitched battle on British soil. It's brutal. The Jacobite dream is crushed under musket fire and government retaliation. You feel the weight of it in the silence that follows. Historians still argue whether the Jacobite movement was ever truly viable or just a romantic, Highland-flavored pipe dream kept alive by catchy ballads and brooding portraits. Back in London, the monarchy is now less ruling and more observing politely. George II dies in 1760, reportedly while on the toilet, because history never loses its sense of timing. And onto the stage strides George III, the grandson, the steady, and the king who finally says, "Right then, maybe I'll actually do something." George III is different. Born in Britain, speaks English like a native because he is one, loves farming, reason, and the idea that maybe kings shouldn't be absentee landlords. You start off thinking, finally, a king who gets it, and for a while that holds true. His early reign is clean-cut and idealistic like a well-ironed cravat, but then things start to fray. The American colonies, oh, they are not having it. Taxation without representation, Stamp Act, tea in the harbor, you know where this is going. George III becomes the face of British tyranny in the New World, even though most of the decisions come from his ministers. Doesn't matter. To Americans, he's the villain in the Revolution pamphlet. Cue the musical numbers. The loss of the American Revolution bruises both empire and ego. George takes it personally. You sit beside him as he paces palace halls fuming, while politicians try to clean up the mess. His reputation never quite recovers. But the real tragedy? His health. George III suffers from mysterious bouts of illness, today thought to be porphyria, though some argue it was bipolar disorder or another neurological issue. His episodes grow worse. He babbles, talks to trees. Once he shakes hands with an oak, thinking it's the King of Prussia. You wince not at the madness but at the public spectacle. It's painfully human. As the king's mind deteriorates, his son, the future George IV, steps in as Prince Regent. It's like a royal understudy getting his big break in a Shakespearean tragedy where the lead actor forgets his lines permanently. You look around and realize something major has shifted. Parliament runs the show now. The monarchy, once the sun of the political solar system, is just a bright moon, still glowing, still important, but no longer the source of gravity. And you're right in the thick of it, watching this slow, constitutional magic trick unfold. Power once held in a jeweled hand now rests in a paper chamber, filled with powdered wigs, rolled parchments, and the rising chorus of public voice. You're lounging in the long twilight of the 18th century, where empire tastes like tea, smells like coal smoke, and sounds like the distant shuffle of red-coated regiments. The crown still gleams, but now it does so behind a glass case of decorum and diminishing power. Welcome to the age of madness, revolutions, and regency fashion, where kings lose minds, colonies vanish, and waistcoats grow taller by the hour. Era. Glance sideways at George III. Still technically king, though reality says otherwise. His mental health has spiraled beyond hope. The man who once ruled the world's largest empire now babbles to empty chairs. Parliament officially steps in with the Regency Act of 1811, and suddenly George IV, formerly the Prince of Wales, is calling the shots. Well, not really calling them. More like lounging extravagantly while his ministers do the work. George IV, your new acting monarch, is a lot. He's got a flair for the dramatic, a taste for luxury, and a growing resemblance to a melted candle in formal wear. But wow, does he know how to host a party. You're now living in the Regency era. Think Jane Austen novels, Byron poetry, and more lace than a bridal warehouse. The monarchy in this period isn't about wielding power. It's about influence. Through culture. George IV commissions John Nash to rework London into a more elegant version of itself. He builds Brighton Pavilion, a seaside palace that looks like a teapot had an architectural fever dream. And you stroll through it, velvet gloves brushing the walls, wondering if he's redecorating to distract from, well, everything else. Meanwhile, outside this powdered bubble, the world is very much on fire. Across the channel, the French Revolution slices through royalty with disturbing efficiency. You flinch at the echo of guillotines. Europe trembles, and out of that chaos rises Napoleon Bonaparte, an artillery officer with big ideas and an even bigger ego. Britain, under George III's nominal reign and the regent's actual rule, becomes Napoleon's most persistent enemy. The British Navy wins a massive victory at Trafalgar in 1805, led by Admiral Nelson, who promptly dies in the process. Still, the win ensures Britain rules the waves. And then, of course, there's Waterloo in 1815. You're there, boots muddy, ears ringing, Wellington's voice cutting through the smoke like dry toast. Napoleon is defeated, for good this time, probably. The monarchy didn't win the battle, but it absolutely gets to bask in the glory afterward. Classic monarch move. Back home, George IV finally becomes king in 1820, after his father's long-delayed death. But by then, he's bloated, bitter, and barely mobile. His brief official reign is a mess of scandal and strained public relations. The press skewers him. The people mock him. His estranged wife tries to crash his coronation. It's like reality TV, but with more epaulets. Still, he does leave behind a glittering architectural legacy and a sense that perhaps the monarchy can survive not through strength but through style. When George IV dies in 1830, the throne passes to his younger brother, William the Forters, a former naval officer affectionately known as the Sailor King. You squint at him, wondering if this one might bring a little calm to the seas. And for a moment he does. William is surprisingly down to earth for a monarch. He dislikes pomp, walks around town with barely a guard, and reportedly greets people with a casual, "How do you do?" You kind of love him. He doesn't rule long, only 7 years. But during that time he witnesses something huge, the Reform Act of 1832. This act isn't about the monarchy exactly, but it shakes the system. It expands voting rights, redraws districts, and weakens the grip of aristocrats in Parliament. The House of Commons is becoming more reflective of the population, still not much. Don't get excited. And the monarchy, wisely, doesn't stand in the way. Historians still argue whether William's reluctance to oppose reform was genuine belief or just smart self-preservation. But either way, the monarchy looks more modern for it. By the time William IV dies in 1837, you feel a strange breeze of transition. The Hanoverian dynasty is about to take a wild turn, not in name, but in spirit. Because the next monarch? She's not a bloated party boy or a reluctant sailor. She's a teenager. She's short, sharp, and about to reign for over 6 decades. She's Victoria. But in this moment, before she takes the throne, you pause to consider how far the monarchy has drifted from its origins. Once absolute rulers, now ceremonial figures, yet somehow still central to the story. Kings and queens no longer control the fate of armies or the price of grain, but they do represent, and in this period that begins to matter more than ever. As you stretch your legs after a long Georgian drama, you realize something else. This period, for all its powdered wigs and political shifts, proves the monarchy's most underrated strength, adaptability. Even as it sheds power, it gains symbolic resilience. You can't quite kill the crown, because people don't just look to it for orders anymore. They look to it for identity. And you're already adjusting your ear for a new name whispered in parliament halls, printed on coins, and scribbled in the corner of young girls' diaries. Victoria is coming. You're squinting through the early morning fog of 1837, peering up at a girl barely 5 feet tall who's just been told she's queen. No pomp, no trumpet fanfare. Just an early visit from the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain, who interrupt her sleep with one life-altering sentence. Your Majesty, this is Queen Victoria, and she's only 18. You're standing in a drawing room at Kensington Palace as she straightens her spine, drops the awkward nickname Drina, and steps into a role that will define an era so vast, so layered, and so absolutely jam-packed with change, it's going to slap her name on the entire century, the Victorian Age. Your world transforms almost immediately. The Industrial Revolution isn't just humming, it's thundering. Trains scream across the countryside. Smokestacks rise like iron mushrooms and soot settles into the very pores of London. You try not to cough. People are moving to cities faster than plumbing can keep up, and cholera becomes an unpleasantly frequent guest. Children work, factories blaze, but there's progress too. Telegraphs zing messages, photography freezes time, and Britain expands into the most sprawling empire the world has ever seen. And the monarchy, well, Victoria grows into it. At first, she leans heavily on her prime ministers, especially the charming Lord Melbourne, who basically tutors her in statecraft. But soon, she marries her cousin Albert, a German prince with the energy of a Type A spreadsheet in human form. Together, they become a power couple for the ages. Albert's all about modernizing the monarchy. Less parties, more productivity. You watch as he promotes science, education, and what Victorians call moral improvement. He also designs the Great Exhibition of 1851, housed in the spectacular Crystal Palace, a glass megastructure so shiny and ambitious, it makes your 21st century self whisper, Pinterest goals. And Victoria? She's the anchor. While Albert manages image and reform, she focuses on the monarchy's role as a moral symbol. Gone is the drama of mistresses, gambling debts, and courtroom scandals. In their place, family values. The royal couple churns out 9 children, who are promptly married off across Europe like diplomatic Pokemon. For a while, it feels like the monarchy's figured it out. A dignified queen, a productive consort, a country on the rise. Then Albert dies in 1861. He's just 42. Typhoid, they say. You stand awkwardly in black as Victoria's world collapses. She disappears from public life, withdraws from view, wears mourning for the rest of her life, 40 more years. Her people call her the Widow of Windsor. For a time, she's so out of sight, people start whispering about abolishing the monarchy entirely. But she doesn't vanish entirely. Instead, she evolves. In private, she's grumpy, stubborn, and fond of Scottish retreats. She develops a scandalously close friendship with John Brown, a servant with a thick accent and even thicker opinions. Historians still argue whether they were secretly married, though no evidence confirms it. Sorry, romantics. In public, however, she slowly reemerges, recast as the empress of an empire. Britain's global holdings have exploded. India, Canada, Australia, South Africa. The sun truly never sets. And in 1876, Disraeli, her prime minister and part-time royal hype man, gets parliament to crown her Empress of India. You blink. Queen of Britain. Still, yes. But now she's the living symbol of a global juggernaut. You ride trains through imperial landscapes, sip tea in far-flung colonies, marvel and cringe at the messy, brutal expansion of British power. The empire is dazzling, but it's built on deep contradictions. Progress and exploitation, wealth and violence, industry and inequality. You walk through London and feel the tug of it all. Marble monuments beside grinding poverty, powdered elites beside soot-slicked children selling matches. And through it, Victoria stands like a granite statue, unshaken, unmoved. She outlives nearly everyone. Melbourne, Disraeli, Gladstone, and even her own children. She reigns for 63 years, setting a record that will stand until her great-great-granddaughter breaks it in the 21st century. You watch as she moves from early idealism to grim widowhood to imperial matriarch, her face shifting from delicate to steely on coins and postage stamps. And still, the monarchy adapts. Victoria's reign isn't just long, it's strategic. She transforms the crown from a source of direct power into a symbolic cornerstone of national identity. She knows when to retreat, when to appear, and, eventually, how to become mythic. In her final years, even her harshest critics speak of her with respect. She's no longer just a queen. She's a living institution. When she finally dies in 1901 at the age of 81, the entire world seems to pause. You stand beside the throngs of mourners as her coffin, draped in white rather than black, is carried through streets lined with bowed heads. Behind it walks a strange mix of soldiers, aristocrats, and foreign royals, including her grandson, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, who will soon help unravel the empire she presided over. As the dust settles, the Victorian age closes like a gilded storybook, and now the 20th century is knocking. Steam gives way to steel. Horse-drawn carriages blink out behind the first sputtering automobiles. Corsets loosen, ideas flare, war looms. But for now, you take one last look at Victoria's weathered crown, still shining in the twilight. The world she ruled is gone, but the monarchy she rebuilt, that still stands. You don't even have time to exhale after Victoria's funeral before the next monarch steps up, silk-lined and cigar in hand. Edward VII, her eldest son, has waited 59 years to become king. That's an entire Game of Thrones. Character arc just for the title. You've seen him at countless public functions smiling stiffly behind his mother, quietly seething in top hats and dinner jackets. Now finally, the crown is his, and suddenly, everything loosens. The Victorian vice grip on manners, on hemlines, on facial expressions, melts like wax in candlelight. You stretch out in a softer world, one swirling with jazz bands, wide-brimmed, hats and after-dinner flirtations. Welcome to the Edwardian era, where the upper crust lounges in garden parties while their servants scramble behind silk-paneled doors. It's elegance at its most delusional, gilded, not golden. Edward is a Mayap, vibe shift in human form. While Victoria was famously unamused, Edward is rarely not amused. He gambles, flirts, overeats, and knows every fashionable tailor in Europe. But he's not just a party prince turned king. He's also unexpectedly deft at diplomacy. You trail him across Europe as he charms everyone from the French president to the Russian czar. He doesn't write sweeping policies, but his friendships and casual chats at dinner tables help smooth the edges of tense alliances. His reign sees the signing of the Entente Cordiale with France in 1904, a move that begins realigning Europe's tangled web of loyalties. The king may not control armies anymore, but his presence still holds weight. At home, though, things are far from stable. Beneath the silk and soft lighting, cracks are forming. The aristocracy clings to its privileges, but the working class is finding its voice, and its anger. Strikes ripple through coal mines and shipyards. Suffragettes, some elegant, some chain-smoking and throwing bricks, march for women's rights. You duck as a protest turns chaotic outside Parliament. There's unrest in Ireland, too. Calls for home rule grow louder, and you can practically feel the tension brewing like a long-held breath. Still, the monarchy maintains its poise. Edward doesn't change the game, but he plays it smoothly. He understands that in this new century, appearances are everything. You watch as royal photographers choreograph his image carefully. Fatherly, worldly, trustworthy. Newspapers lap it up. Edward becomes the first true media monarch, paving the way for the paparazzi parade that will follow his descendants like shadows. But just as you start to enjoy the rhythm of the Edwardian glow-up, the clock runs out. In 1910, after just 9 years on the throne, Edward dies of a series of heart attacks, probably not helped by the 10 cigars a day. You stand respectfully in a crowd as his body is carried through London. Behind the coffin walks a once-in-a-lifetime funeral lineup. 9 reigning monarchs of Europe all marching together, most of them related through Victoria's sprawling royal family tree. It's the last time the royal houses of Europe will look like one big family reunion. Enter George V, Edward's son. Not as stylish, not as smooth, definitely not a party king. George is the kind of guy who loves stamp collecting and uniforms. Lots of uniforms. But don't be fooled. His reign will face some of the biggest earthquakes in modern history. Barely 4 years in, World War I detonates across Europe like a bad dream you can't wake up from. You're surrounded by trench mud, telegrams, and total uncertainty. Kings, emperors, and dynasties fall like dominoes. George's first cousin, the flamboyant Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, becomes his greatest enemy. Another cousin, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, is overthrown and executed along with his entire family. It's monarchy season on hard mode. George V faces a crisis of identity. The British public, panicked and suspicious, start glaring at the royal family's German roots. After all, their real family name is Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which sounds like a line of villainous perfume. So in 1917, with war rage at its peak, George does something radical. He rebrands the entire monarchy. With a stroke of the pen, the royal house becomes Windsor, as British-sounding as cricket on a rainy afternoon. It's a PR masterstroke. You nod approvingly. It's like renaming your band before the critics catch on. But the war scars run deep. You walk the streets with George after the armistice and feel the chill of morning in the air. The empire has survived for now, but its people are changed, more cynical, less dazzled by crowns. George sees it, and he begins dialing the monarchy's visibility strategy up to 11. He introduces the Christmas radio broadcast, starts doing more public walkabouts. He shifts the crown from distant figurehead to comforting presence. It's subtle, but significant. You see it in the way people talk about their king during national crises. He's not just a symbol anymore. He's family furniture, familiar, functional. Still, the cracks deepen. The post-war years bring economic collapse, worker revolts, Irish independence. The sun hasn't quite set on the British Empire, but it's definitely checking the horizon. When George V dies in 1936, You feel the exhaustion in his bones, and in the nation's. He once quipped, "I pray to God my eldest son will never marry and have children." Cheeky. But unfortunately for him, his eldest son absolutely does take the throne next. And, oh boy, that crown's about to slip. So your new king is Edward VIII, tall, tanned, and frankly a little too charming for his own good. You watch him ascend the throne in 1936 with the confident ease of a man who's never known a day, without valet-polished shoes. The press calls him modern, dashing, a fresh breeze through the starchy corridors of Buckingham Palace. You half expect him to replace the coronation carriage with a sports car. And then, he falls in love. Not with a countess or princess. No, Edward chooses Wallis Simpson, an American socialite with a quick wit and, let's say, a complicated marital history. Twice divorced and still technically married to husband number 2, Wallis is everything a king, especially the supreme. Governor of the Church of England should absolutely not marry. You sit with your tea halfway to your lips as the scandal unfolds, slowly, painfully, in real time. Behind palace doors, it's less a love story and more a constitutional crisis wrapped in a dinner party guest list. Parliament balks. The Archbishop tuts. Even Winston Churchill, normally a wild card, says, maybe don't. But Edward is stubborn. Not dramatic, not angry, just infuriatingly calm in his refusal to give up Wallis. "I have found it impossible," he declares in a now famous broadcast, "to carry the heavy burden of responsibility without the help and support of the woman I love." That's the moment your jaw hits the floor. He abdicates. He actually abdicates. You watch the ink dry on the papers that make his little brother, George VI, king instead. Edward leaves not with royal fanfare, but quietly, bound for exile, and an awkwardly funded lifestyle in France. You have to admire the romanticism. But wow, the mess it leaves behind. The monarchy barely has time to adjust its cufflinks. George VI's birdie to family never wanted this job. He's shy, plagued by a crippling stammer, and walks into the yacht, crowned like someone handed him a porcupine wrapped in velvet. His early speeches are agonizing, but you can feel him trying. The nation watches nervously as if waiting to see if the roof holds, and then the storm of war returns. Hitler's rise in Germany is no longer a distant rumble. It's a freight train. You listen to George's voice crackle over the radio as he declares Britain at war in 1939. It's halting, stiff, but somehow steady. You realize something crucial. People don't need a king who dazzles. They need one who stays. George VI becomes a symbol of exactly that. He refuses to leave London during the Blitz. You peer through bomb-blackened streets and see Buckingham Palace itself take a hit. He and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, yes, the future, Queen Mum, walk among the rubble, visiting bomb shelters, comforting children. It's performative, sure, but it's also real. The king is in the thick of it, and you respect that. Meanwhile, whispers circle Edward and Wallis in exile. Rumors swirl of Nazi sympathies, secret meetings, suspicious letters. Historians still argue whether Edward was merely naive or something darker, a liability to the very institution he once embodied. Either way, he's out of the picture, sipping champagne somewhere in Portugal while his brother holds the line at home. You survived the long, hard years of World War II under George VI's quiet grit. His radio broadcasts improve. His walkabouts become warmer. The people grow deeply attached to him, not as a fairy tale monarch, but as a flesh and blood father figure, one who limps and stutters and still shows up. The war ends, and the nation breathes. But the world has changed. The empire is crumbling faster now. India gains independence in 1947. You see the royal map shrink and twist as red fades to beige. George doesn't resist it. He adjusts, because he's not the kind of king who fights tides. He weathers them, but he's tired. The war took its toll. By 1952, George VI is dead of lung cancer, the result of years of chain smoking under stress. You stand with the crowds once more, mourning not a glamorous king, but a beloved one. There's no scandal here, no abdication, just quiet grief. And then, without pause, another Elizabeth takes the throne. She's only 25. No one, least of all her, expected the crown so soon. And you, weary from decades of upheaval, lean in close, because something tells you this reign will be long. You don't even get to finish your tea before the war drums start again. It's 1910 and Edward VII has just left the building, literally. After a brief but indulgent reign full of cigars and continental charm, his son George V now takes the stage. And you? You're gripping the edge of your seat as the world teeters toward its most devastating act yet. George isn't flashy. In fact, he's almost the anti-Edward. Stiff, dutiful, and more into uniforms than soiree, George V embodies a new kind of monarch, one who doesn't dazzle but endures. You adjust your collar and straighten your back. This guy means business. He knows the monarchy can't just coast on glamour anymore. It has to matter. The first years of his reign are almost deceptively calm. The British Empire still blankets the globe in red ink, but underneath, it's all tension. The suffragettes are throwing bricks through windows. Irish home rule is boiling. Industrial strikes are multiplying like rabbits. You dodge a flying protest pamphlet and realize the Crown's tightrope act has only just begun. And then, boom, June 1914. An archduke, a bullet, and suddenly, you're yanked into the Great War. World War I reshapes everything. You hear the thunder of artillery from France echo through drawing rooms in London. Nearly 1 million British soldiers will die. As the monarch, George V can't fight in the trenches himself, but he becomes a symbol of solidarity. He visits hospitals. He sends handwritten notes to bereaved families. You stand quietly as he walks among the wounded, the strain obvious on his weathered face. But there's a weird footnote here. His cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, is technically the enemy, and another cousin, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, is about to be executed by Bolsheviks. It's like a royal family reunion where everyone brought weapons. Historians still argue whether the tight web of royal intermarriages helped cause or merely reflected Europe's volatility. This awkward cousin problem leads to one of the most unexpected rebrands in history. In 1917, George decides it's time to ditch the German-sounding family name, Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which frankly sounds like something you'd order at a Gothic furniture store. From now on, it's House of Windsor. Sleek, patriotic, much less likely to get eggs thrown at it. Meanwhile, the war ends, but peace is fragile. You shuffle through a post-war Britain riddled with grief, debt, and disillusionment. The 1920s are no Gatsby party here. The monarchy, once a golden pillar, now feels more like an institution on probation. But George plays the long game. He doesn't need fireworks. He needs faith. Through economic collapses, political turnovers, and the rise of socialism, he carefully reshapes the monarchy into something quieter, humbler, and more domestic. He supports charities, keeps his distance from scandal, and becomes the first monarch to broadcast a Christmas message on the radio in 1932. His voice, steady and fatherly, crackles through the static. I speak now from my home and from my heart. You sip your tea. That message? It lands. People feel it. For the first time, the monarchy isn't just a concept. It's in their living rooms. George V is no revolutionary, but he pioneers a transformation from imperial demigod to family man in a crown. There's even a slight spooky twist toward the end. As his health declines in 1936, George's doctors are, let's say, strategic. One, Lord Dawson, reportedly administers a lethal dose of morphine and cocaine, not just to end the king's suffering, but to ensure his death is announced in the morning papers, not the less dignified evening editions. Historians still debate whether this act was mercy, manipulation, or royal spin control at its most chilling. So there you stand, in the fading light of empire and tradition. George, faced with the monarchy still intact, but just barely. He's left behind a throne bruised but standing, a legacy of steady hands over spectacle, and you don't know it yet. But the real chaos, the romantic scandal, the abdication crisis, is only a few steps away. Hang on to your crown. You barely have time to exhale after George V's final breath, before the crown leaps into the hands of a man who probably shouldn't be trusted with a houseplant, let alone a kingdom. Edward VIII, tall, charming, fashionable to a fault, practically struts into kingship in 1936. You blink, and suddenly Britain is being run by a man who prefers jazz clubs to statecraft. He's a celebrity monarch in an age before celebrity was a job. Women swoon. Tabloids salivate. You watch him wave from balconies, flash that movie star grin, and then, oh dear, you spot her. Wallace Simpson, twice divorced, American, not exactly Downton Abbey material, and Edward is smitten. He doesn't, just like her. He's ready to throw the entire 1,000-year tradition of monarchy into the Thames for her. At first, you think this might just be one of those royally inconvenient affairs, but then he starts bringing her to official functions, mentions her in conversations with ministers, talks about marrying her, out loud. Cue the national clutching of pearls. The British government freaks out. The Church of England, which Edward is technically head of, absolutely cannot condone a remarriage to a living divorcee. And Parliament? Not even remotely on board. You watch political gears grind to a halt while this very personal drama becomes a full-blown constitutional crisis. Now, here's a quirk. The public doesn't know much. British newspapers, out of a strange cocktail of loyalty and denial, refuse to report on the scandal. But Americans are having a field day, and British citizens who read international press or have radios start piecing it together. Historians still argue whether the British press's silence delayed the inevitable or just made it more dramatic when the truth exploded. In December 1936, you get the speech. It's short, awkward, and forever iconic. Edward VIII abdicates the throne, telling the nation he cannot continue without the help and support of the woman I love. You glance around the room. Some people cry, others curse. Everyone's stunned. He becomes the Duke of Windsor, hops a ship and marries Wallis in France without a single member of the royal family in attendance. And just like that, a man throws away the crown for love. Sweet, right? Sort of. You also can't shake the sense that this love story cost the nation more than just headlines. Edward wasn't just abdicating a throne, he was abandoning a job. One that came with bomb shelters and microphones and heavy ancient expectations. This seismic moment also reshuffles the royal deck. Next in line, Edward's younger brother Albert, but he's anxious, shy, struggles with a stammer so pronounced that even ordering tea can be painful. You watch him hesitate, then step up out of duty, not desire, and take the regnal name George VI to honor his father and calm the nation. Back to Edward for a moment, though, because the story doesn't end with a sunset wedding. The Duke and Duchess of Windsor spend most of their lives in exile. Elegant, yes, but awkwardly out of step with the institution they almost broke. They dabble in writing, fashion, and yes, a few eyebrow-raising visits to Nazi Germany in the late 1930s. You try not to look too closely at the photos of Edward giving what suspiciously resembles a salute. Historians still squabble over how sympathetic Edward was to fascist ideas, and whether his exile was more about romance or political containment. Either way, he's a ghost monarch, forever part of the royal tapestry, but always a bit off-pattern. Back home, Britain reels. The abdication leaves emotional cracks in the monarchy's foundation. For centuries, the crown was supposed to be eternal, unshakable, ordained. And now, it's human, vulnerable, capable of being refused. You sit with that discomfort, wondering if the monarchy has permanently lost its mystique. Yet, weirdly, this scandal may have saved it, because coming next is a king who doesn't charm or dazzle or strut. He endures. And in the ashes of abdication, that's exactly what the country needs. You hardly have time to recover from the abdication bombshell before you're swept into a new chapter, one with none of Edward's flair, but all of his brother, Albert's heart. Albert is now George VI, a reluctant king with a nervous voice and a world about to collapse around him. It's 1937. You fidget as coronation preparations begin. Everything feels hushed, tense, like a ceremony being held on a fault line. George VI, painfully aware he wasn't supposed to be here, is determined to get this right. He's not charismatic, he's not fashionable, but he's earnest. And that stammer? It's still there. You can hear it struggle against every word, especially during speeches. One of those speeches, his very first wartime address in 1939, sends shivers down your spine. Britain has declared war on Germany, and the quiet man with the trembling voice suddenly becomes a pillar. His courage, not in grand gestures but in showing up anyway, starts to bind the monarchy to something deeper. Shared struggle. You huddle in blackout curtains while bombs fall over London. The Luftwaffe tries to pound Britain into submission, but the king stays put, refuses to leave. Even when Buckingham Palace takes a hit, you blink through the dust. This king's not running. He visits bomb sites, talks with survivors, wears his anxiety like armor. And the people? They feel it. They trust it. Next to him stands his wife, Queen Elizabeth, the queen mother-to-be. She's all charm and poise, steel wrapped in silk. Nazi propaganda calls her the most dangerous woman in Europe. You smirk. She probably loves that. Together, they become a wartime symbol. Calm amid chaos, steadfast and just relatable enough. Not superhuman, but very human. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, their daughter Elizabeth quietly watches and learns. But for now, it's still George's show. Back in London, George VI shoulders heavy burdens. Physically, too. The stress wrecks his health. He develops stomach ulcers, becomes chain-smoking's most faithful disciple, and ages twice as fast as normal monarchs. But he keeps going, keeps working. He knows the monarchy's been bruised, his brother saw to that, and every ribbon he cuts, every shelter he visits, is a small act of national repair. Here's a fringe moment. In 1944, before D-Day, George visits the troops, but due to his war injuries and a lingering limp, he has to wear a specially designed boot with a hidden lift, so he doesn't appear lopsided next to his generals. It's a small vanity, but also a metaphor. He's constantly propping up an institution with quiet, careful balance. By the time the war ends in 1945, you're exhausted. The nation is too. But the monarchy, it's still standing. Stronger even. Because George VI never tried to sparkle, he tried to serve. You glance back at Edward VIII and wonder if maybe abdication was the best thing he ever did for the crown. Post-war, Britain shifts rapidly. The empire starts crumbling. India gains independence in 1947. Other colonies soon follow. You watch the Union Jack come down in place after place, and the monarchy, once the jewel-studded face of empire, must now become something else, a symbol without direct power. Historians still argue whether George's reign marked the true beginning of the end for British imperialism, or merely the point when the curtain was pulled back. And just when he might have settled into a slower pace, George VI begins to falter. Illness creeps in, arteriosclerosis, lung cancer, though they don't use that word out loud. His left lung is removed in 1951. He waves from balconies looking pale, ghost-like. You know it's close. February 6, 1952. He dies in his sleep. You stand in silence as the news spreads. Flags drop to half-mast. The world tilts again, but this time the monarchy doesn't shudder. It pivots, because standing in the wings is a young woman in a simple black dress, returning from Kenya with duty in her suitcase. Elizabeth, she's 25. She wasn't supposed to become queen this soon, but here she is, and ready or not, the second Elizabethan age begins. You're standing at the edge of a runway, rain streaking the tarmac, when a plane touches down and history steps out, wearing black. It's 1952, and 25-year-old Elizabeth has just lost her father. But you barely have time to grieve with her before she's swept into the weightiest role on earth. The crown doesn't wait. It never has. She becomes Elizabeth II, and from the moment she's sworn in, you can feel the monarchy shifting beneath your feet. No dramatic speeches, no grand flourishes, just quiet steel behind pursed lips. She's not flashy like her Uncle Edward. She's not shy like her father. She's something else. Steady, unblinking, impossibly calm. You ride along through her early years as queen, watching her adjust. Television cameras are now part of the job. Her 1953 coronation, broadcast worldwide. You squint at your screen, as gold robes and ancient rites stream through fuzzy black and white. Millions watch from pubs and neighbors' parlors. The monarchy has entered the age of mass media, and it can no longer retreat into mystery. Yet Elizabeth somehow remains unknowable. You see her smile, wave, speak in that measured tone, but never crack. Her private feelings are locked tighter than the crown jewels. That's the point. She's here to be the monarchy, not talk about it. And she pulls it off for decades. At her side stands Prince Philip, a former naval officer with opinions sharper than his suits. He modernizes the monarchy from behind the scenes, pushing for streamlined operations and less fuss. But he's also, let's be honest, occasionally a walking headline. His gaffes are legendary, some cringeworthy, some hilarious. Remember the time he asked an indigenous Australian if they still threw spears? You sigh. The man is Buckingham Palace's least filtered microphone. Still together they raise 4 children, Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward. And here's where things get complicated, because Elizabeth isn't just a monarch, she's a mother. And those two roles don't always mesh. Her eldest, Charles, grows up under immense pressure, groomed from birth to be king. He's sensitive, cerebral, slightly melancholic. You watch him struggle to live up to the golden image of his mother, while constantly being reminded he'll never quite match it. And then, Diana. It's the 1980s, and suddenly the royal family becomes tabloid catnip. The wedding of Charles and Diana is a global fairy tale, a glittering ceremony watched by 750 million people. But you, of course, know better. Fairy tales are sanitized. This story has sharp edges. The marriage crumbles publicly, painfully. You see the cracks in royal stoicism. Diana, beloved by the people, charismatic, heart on her sleeve, becomes a threat to the institution she married into. Charles fumbles. The palace fumbles harder. The media devours it all. And then, 1997, Diana dies a car crash in a Paris tunnel. You remember exactly where you were. The world mourns like it lost a sister. But the Queen, she stays silent, hidden at Balmoral. No flag flies at half-mast, no statement, just absence. The country is furious. The monarchy teeters. For the first time in her reign, Elizabeth looks completely out of step with her people. Historians still argue whether she was honoring protocol or simply stunned. But 5 days later, she returns to London, bows her head to Diana's coffin, and gives a live televised address. It's not perfect, but it works. The Queen adapts just enough. The monarchy survives, and that becomes her secret weapon. Not charisma, not innovation, but adaptation. Through scandals, Andrew's headlines, Charles's remarriage, through social shifts, decolonization, women's rights, Brexit, through tragedy and triumph, she keeps showing up. Always poised, always on time, always there. You ride through the Jubilee celebrations, silver, golden, diamond, platinum, each one more astonishing than the last. By the 2010s, she's not just a monarch, she's the monarch, a living landmark. Tourists line up to see Buckingham Palace like it's a mythical creature. Kids dress up as her for Halloween. Even the crown can't capture her completely, and yet the world keeps changing. Scandals keep bubbling. Meghan and Harry step back. Interviews are aired. Royal traditions are questioned, some of them bitterly. The Queen, now well into her 90s, doesn't comment. She never does. But the silence feels different now. Calmer, maybe. Or maybe just tired. Then in September 2022, the silence becomes final. Elizabeth II dies peacefully at Balmoral, age 96. You stand in a sea of flowers outside the palace gates, and something ancient shifts. Britain has lost its constant. The woman who steadied the ship for 70 years is gone. And for the first time in most people's living memory, the words change. God save the king. You barely adjust to the absence of Elizabeth II before a new name echoes through your ears. Charles III. After 70 years as heir apparent, he finally steps into the role he's prepared for since before color TV was a thing. It's 2022 and the crown lands on a man who's both deeply familiar and oddly controversial. Let's be honest, you're not sure how this is going to go. Charles has always been a walking contradiction. Raised in palaces yet famously miserable at boarding school. In line for the throne but endlessly criticized in the tabloids. A man of tradition who talks to his plants and champions organic farming decades before it was cool. You watch him step forward with weary eyes and an awkward smile as if he knows the nation is collectively thinking, are we really doing this? But he's different now. Older, yes, but maybe softer, less prickly. The public address he gives, just days after his mother's death, is calm, warm, even heartfelt. You hear echoes of Elizabeth in his tone. Not her unshakable steel, perhaps, but a kind of weathered resilience. He speaks of service, duty, and of course, Camilla, now officially Queen Consort. That title alone once felt impossible. Remember the drama? Of course you do. Charles and Diana's marriage was a royal soap opera, and Camilla, long branded the other woman, was its eternal villain. But time, like the British press, forgets faster than it forgives. Camilla now smiles from the balcony, pearls, shining, her new role subtly unshakable. You watch the coronation in 2023. It's a pared-back affair compared to Elizabeth's, though still dripping with ritual. Golden robes, ancient oil, choir boys whose voices haven't cracked yet. It's all there. But the tone is different, more inclusive, slightly more diverse. Leaders of various faiths appear. Charles reads the room. He knows the monarchy's survival depends on being seen as useful, not just decorative. He slimmed the royal family too. Fewer working royals, tighter budgets, scaled-down ceremonies. Partly to reflect modern Britain, partly because scandals have shrunk the available cast list. Let's not pretend Andrew's issues are going away anytime soon. And then there's Harry and Meghan. You wince. It's the royal family's open wound. When they stepped back, then spoke out, from racism claims to tabloid trauma, they cracked the glossy surface. Charles barely responds publicly. He avoids confrontation like it's another climate disaster. But behind closed doors, you suspect the family's WhatsApp group is complicated. Meanwhile, Charles continues his quieter crusades. He's been talking about the environment since the 1970s. He hugs trees. He probably named his compost pile. Historians still debate whether his outspoken eco-activism will help or hurt the monarchy in the long run. But one thing's clear, the king has a cause. But even with all his initiatives, you sense something fragile about this reign. The public support is polite but thin. The Commonwealth wobbles. Jamaica talks openly about becoming a republic. Australia politely eyes the exits. Younger generations shrug when asked about the royals. TikTok doesn't do crown reverence. And the media? It's merciless. Every gesture, every facial twitch is dissected. Yes, even the pen debacle during one of Charles's first public signings, when a leaky fountain pen sent him into a visible fit of royal irritation. The man waited 7 decades for this job, only to discover it's now mostly damage control. But don't count him out yet. Charles is keenly aware that the monarchy is no longer divine. It's performative. Its power lies not in ruling, but in symbolizing continuity, empathy, and national glue. His job is to hold the fabric together just long enough for someone else, someone younger, to pick it up. You glance at William and Kate, the polished, paparazzi-savvy couple next in line. They represent the future, a bridge between tradition and touchscreens. But for now, it's still Charles's turn. You might have rolled your eyes once, but now, watching him stroll through rainy streets, shake hands, and talk climate policy with schoolchildren, you feel something unexpected. Respect. Maybe he's not a superstar. Maybe he's not his mother. But he is king, and he might just be the steady, slightly eccentric placeholder the monarchy needs to buy time for its next act. And now, you drift toward the edge of the known story. You're still watching, still wondering, what exactly is the future of the British monarchy? The crown, once forged in conquest and cloaked in divine right, now floats on a sea of shifting public opinion, social media storms, and parliamentary handrails. You lie there, eyes fluttering shut, as the royal family squints into a modern world that isn't sure it needs them. With Charles III settling into a quieter, more ceremonial reign, the spotlight now glows brighter on the next generation. You can practically hear the murmur at Buckingham Palace cocktail parties. When will William take over? Prince William, now the Prince of Wales, carries the full weight of the monarchy's future on his slightly too symmetrical shoulders. He's the heir the PR teams dreamed up, poised, dutiful, media-savvy, and only occasionally photobombed by his 3 adorable children. With Kate, now Princess of Wales, they form a glittering and carefully curated package. Tradition-wrapped in relatability. Garden parties meet Instagram slideshows, and yet the pressures remain. You watch William walk a tightrope, honoring royal protocol with one foot and leaning into modern openness with the other. He talks mental health. He talks fatherhood. He even talks feelings, but always within the bounds of what a future king can safely feel in public. Kate, meanwhile, perfects the royal art of never making a mistake in public. She's elegant, smiling, and terrifyingly prepared, like the royal family's human air purifier. Scandals swirl around them, but never from them. You almost start believing again. Almost, but then there's the other side of the coin. Harry and Meghan living in California, sipping green juice and telling their side of the story to Oprah. They've rebranded as royal rebels, detaching from the crown while still wielding its weight. Their departure stripped some of the monarchy's sparkle, exposing wounds the institution was never good at bandaging. Accusations of racism, isolation, and institutional coldness now trail the royal family like stubborn fog. The Windsors, once firm and silent, are learning, slowly, clumsily, that silence is no longer protection. In the era of tweets, leaks, and viral confessionals, privacy is a luxury even a palace can't buy. Historians still argue whether the monarchy is evolving fast enough to keep its place, or if it's simply outliving its usefulness. Some believe its symbolic unity still binds the UK and Commonwealth together. Others see it as a gilded remnant, too expensive, too exclusive, too disconnected. You roll over in bed and wonder, in a world of elected presidents and democratic selfies, what role does a crown truly serve? The Commonwealth, too, is fraying. In the Caribbean, republics rise. Barbados has already said goodbye. Jamaica and others might soon follow. The idea of a distant monarch, white, British, ancestral, feels less charming and more colonial by the year. The crown no longer rules the waves. It's treading water in global public opinion. Yet despite all this, the monarchy endures. Somehow, you squint at the coronation of Charles. You glance at William shaking hands in Liverpool. You watch Elizabeth's image still adorning currency, classrooms, commemorative teacups. There's something deeply British in the monarchy's stubborn survival. It's nostalgia you can photograph. It's tradition you can wear on a stamp. The crown has changed, though. Make no mistake. It's smaller, lighter, more performative. A hat full of history, held up by ceremony and sentiment rather than force or faith. You think back to Alfred burning his cakes, to Henry VIII's tantrums, to Elizabeth I's glittering solo reign, and you realize this family, this institution, has been adapting for over 1,000 years. No longer conquerors, no longer rulers, not even divine, just symbols. Symbols that stand on balconies, wave politely, and try not to blink under the weight of centuries. And now, here you are, at the very edge of the timeline. The monarchy's future isn't written in golden ink or sealed by papal rings. It's hanging in the air, somewhere between public affection, constitutional relevance, and the next royal baby. Maybe it survives. Maybe it splinters. Maybe the next coronation is on TikTok. But tonight, you've walked through the long, winding, scandal-soaked, glorious, peculiar path of kings and queens, from Roman ghosts to digital thrones. And somehow, you made it. Even if, let's face it, you probably wouldn't survive medieval dental hygiene. So now, your eyes are heavy, your breath slower, and the storm of history fades into the quiet hush of now. The crown that once commanded armies and whispered to popes is resting, tucked away in a velvet case, gleaming softly under glass. All those battles, betrayals, coronations, abdications, they drift like falling petals, gently piling at your feet. You've stood beside bonfires lit for Elizabeth I. You've winced at Henry's sixth marriage. You've tiptoed through plague-ridden streets and blinked at satellite broadcasts from royal balconies. And now, the echo of it all dissolves into the hush of night. Let yourself wander just for a moment, through a candlelit hallway of time. Thrones turn to shadows, portraits faded into gold-tinted memories. The monarchy may change, break, rise again, or gently fold itself into the pages of history. But you were there for all of it. Every crown, every coronation, every quirky royal pet and policy disaster. And whether you believe the crown still matters or simply like the pageantry, there's something timeless in the telling. It's not just a story of power, it's a lullaby of endurance, of people trying to outlast their own mistakes in silk robes and stolen jewels. So, close your eyes now. Let the banners fall. Let the crowds go home. Let the weight of history lift, like mist off the Thames. You've survived 1,000 years in one night. Sweet dreams.